Let us pray.
Heavenly Father, we just want to give you praise, give you glory and honor. We thank you for your faithfulness and your goodness with us. We ask you, God, that your hands remain on us in this nation. We ask God in a very special way that, oh God, help us through these violent crimes we are now experiencing in our land. Let your grace, let your hands be upon us, help us, and deliver us out of all those atrocities. Let your hands be with us, we pray. Almighty God, by whom alone kings reign and princes decree justice, and from whom alone cometh all counsel, wisdom, and understanding. We, thy unworthy servants, here gathered together in thy name, do most humbly beseech thee to send down thy heavenly wisdom from above to direct and guide us in all our consultation, and grant that we, having thy fear always before our eyes, and laid aside all private interests, prejudices, and partial affection, the result of all our counsel may be to the glory of thy blessed name, the maintenance of true religion and justice, the safety, honor, and happiness of the Queen, the public will, peace, and tranquility of St. Lucia, and the uniting and knitting together of the hearts of all persons, and as it is within the same, in true Christian love and charity, one towards another, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. The grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, the love of God, and the fellowship of the Holy Ghost be with us all evermore. Amen.
Good morning, honorable members. I have received an excuse from the honorable member for Castries Central and minister in the Ministry of Finance, Economic Growth, Job Creation, External Affairs, and the Public Service, in informing that she will be late. The honorable member for Grosley and Minister for Equity, Social Justice, Local Government and Empowerment, and the honorable member for Freeport South will not be attending today's sitting. Mr. Kenneth Foster, CBEQC, passed away on Thursday, 18th June 2020. The official funeral for the late Mr. Kenneth Foster will be held at the Minor Basilica of the Immaculate Conception on Monday, July 27th at 2 p.m. The body will lie in repose at the House of Parliament on the morning of Monday, July 27th from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. Mr. Foster was a well-renowned barrister of law who defended and fought for the underprivileged and marginalized, often doing pro bono work. He served as the leader of the St. Lucia Labour Party in 1964. He was also a member of Parliament from 1974 to 1987 and also served as Deputy Speaker of the House of Assembly. Honorable members, I beg that we all stand in a moment of silence in the honor of our dearly departed. Thank you very much, honorable members. Statements from ministers. Minister for Commerce, Industry, Investment, Enterprise Development, and Consumer Affairs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as we have concluded a series of consultations as regards to the authority that was given to the Cannabis Commission, I find it prudent to bring a report to Parliament and, by extension, the nation. Mr. Speaker, in St. Lucia and in many countries throughout the world, cannabis is illegal. The Drugs Prevention of Misuse Act, Cap 3.02, has outlawed the possession, use, and interaction with cannabis and cannabis resin on our shores for many years. The status of this plant and the illegality associated with its possession, cultivation, and consumption was done at the behest of larger, more developed global interests. It is they who categorize it inherently as dangerous and void of any value or benefit, medicinal or otherwise. After years of this thinking, Mr. Speaker, in 2014, the CARICOM heads of government, at its 25th intersessional meeting in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, mandated the establishment of a CARICOM Cannabis Commission to examine the possibility of reform to the legal regimes regulating cannabis in the CARICOM countries. The well-researched and worded report of the CARICOM Cannabis Commission noted, among other things, that the very basis of the treatment of the cannabis plant, which, Mr. Speaker, I will remind you, was its lack of medical or other benefit, was incorrect. Mr. Speaker, though research continues to evidence that there are negative effects and possible danger of use of cannabis by the youth and portions of the population, research has and continues to confirm that the plant has considerable medicinal value. Scientists have in recent years taken a critical look at the plant, Mr. Speaker, and derived imperial specific data suggesting that many of the negative assertions made against the plant were either ill-founded or incorrect. Mr. Speaker, while scientists have spent the last 15 years determining that the cannabis plant was incorrectly classified, many nations within our region have reviewed the prohibition on cannabis and allowed for cannabis to be produced and used. While the negative physiological impact of cannabis was better understood and the great gateway drug theory was being disapproved, Mr. Speaker, 33 U.S. states were reclassifying cannabis and allowing for its medical use. While the dangers of alcohol were being examined as against that of cannabis, countries were legalizing cannabis for personal use by the adult population, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, while some of the very same global interests who colored the perception of the plant are reassessing the restriction on cannabis, St. Lucia maintains penalties ranging from 3 years in prison or a fine of $100,000 on summary conviction, or 14 years in prison or a fine of $200,000 on indictment. Mr. Speaker, 70% of inmates admitted for cannabis-related offenses were between the ages of 20 to 35, and over 50% of these had a secondary or tertiary level education. Mr. Speaker, over 90% of those convicted and imprisoned for cannabis were employed. Therefore, it would seem that this regime succeeds in robbing us of young, able, contributing members to our society and economy. Mr. Speaker, while persons in the Americas and Europe use the plant in various forms and allow the development of multi-billion-dollar industries in their respective countries, an economic analysis has shown that criminalization of cannabis has been ineffective in reducing its use, even among the youth, and comes at a cost of $3.6 million to the economy. It would seem, Mr. Speaker, that a punitive criminal justice system and an unregulated criminal market, which is a product of the war on drugs, has failed. Studies have shown drugs, including cannabis, alcohol, and many others, are most effectively managed within a responsibly regulated public health framework. Cognizant of the tides of change, Mr. Speaker, and calls from the public and other stakeholders, the government of St. Lucia, being mindful of the need for reform concerning its cannabis laws, approved the establishment of a Cannabis Commission on July 29, 2019. The commission was mandated to consult and provide recommendations on the design of a new legislative and regulatory framework consistent with the government's commitment to regulate and restrict access to cannabis. Mr. Speaker, the commission comprised individuals and representatives from the following agencies and groups. Mr. Speaker, I will name the names for your information. Mr. Michael Gordon QC, Attorney at Law, was the chairperson. Tricia Sipal, representative of the Attorney General Chambers. Dylan Norbert Inglis, representative of the Ministry of Commerce. Kemuel Jabatis, representative of the Ministry of Agriculture. Felix and Hill, representative of the Ministry of Health. Benson de Turville, representative of the Ministry of Home Affairs. Fridora Justin Alcindor, representative of the Ministry of Equity. Moses Jabatis, representative of the Leader of the Opposition. Vernita Thomas, representative of Invest St. Lucia. Andre Decarius, representative of the Cannabis Movement. Joel Henry, representative of the National Youth Council. Paul Francis, representative of the Ayanola Council for the Advancement of Rastafari. And Clement Fauché, representative of the Ayanola Council for the Advancement of Rastafari. Mr. Speaker, the members of the Commission offered a range of perspectives on the cannabis issue and appreciated the significance of the need to review the law on cannabis. The terms of reference submitted to the Commission provided that the protection of young and vulnerable and protection of public health and safety were paramount. Mr. Speaker, the Commission benefited from the expertise of an economic consultant who provided an economic analysis of the cannabis regime and industry, a medical expert who afforded the Commission insight into medical issues, perspective, and pertinent considerations, the Performance Management and Delivery Unit, PMDU, Advanced Intellectual Methods, Marketing Consultancy, and a number of work groups consisted of skilled and experienced persons from various fields. An aggressive marketing and communication campaign, Mr. Speaker, aimed at sensitizing the public on the role of the Commission and to gauge public sentiment on the issue was also implemented through various social media platforms, public service announcements, billboard ads, and an appearance on a radio talk show. Furthermore, a simple survey was run through digital media channels with the question, do you think that a regulated cannabis industry would be beneficial to St. Lucia? Mr. Speaker, 73%, or 948 of respondents, answered in the affirmative. Mr. Speaker, prior to submitting its final report, the St. Lucia Cannabis Commission undertook a series of consultations to which members of the public were invited to express their views on the issue of cannabis. Mr. Speaker, community meetings were held in Anslere, Castries, Babonneau, Soufrière, Vieux-Fort, Grosley, and Dennery. These meetings, Mr. Speaker, were attended by parents, teachers, community leaders, farmers, the youth, and the police throughout each of the respective communities. The overwhelming majority of attendees, Mr. Speaker, indicated support for the revision of the existing regime and the exploration of or examination of a regulated and controlled legalized regime. Mr. Speaker, it must be noted that none of the attendees of the community meetings opposed the revision of the cannabis regime. Many expressed, however, that in the development of any framework or introduction of a cannabis industry, whether for medicinal, religious, or personal use, provision must be made for the protection of the youth, the vulnerable, small farmer, and the Rastafarian community. Mr. Speaker, upon presentation of the report to Cabinet, Cabinet further requested a national consultation to complement the Cannabis Commission report and to include key stakeholders who had not taken the opportunity of expressing their views in the initial consultation process. Mr. Speaker, focus group consultations were then done virtually with professional groups, government, departments, agencies, faith-based organizations, and the youth. And these included, Mr. Speaker, Group 1, faith-based organizations, 42 participants. Group 2, youth and sporting groups, 30 participants. Group 3, which comprises of the St. Lucia Bar Association, the Institute of Chartered Accountants, St. Lucia Bankers Association, St. Lucia Medical and Dental Association, the Pharmacy Council of St. Lucia Allied Health Council, and the St. Lucia Nurses Association, which included 27 participants in total, Mr. Speaker. Group 4, government bodies and other agencies, which included 44 participants, to include Export St. Lucia Hotel and Tourism Association, St. Lucia Manufacturers Association, St. Lucia Bureau of Standards, St. Lucia Chamber of Commerce, Agriculture and Industry, St. Lucia Coalition of Services, government ministries and departments. Mr. Speaker, a national consultation was also hosted, which was televised and streamed live on NTN and the Government of St. Lucia Facebook and YouTube pages. The presentations were well received, with many expressing their interest and appreciation of the work done to date by the Commission. The participants, Mr. Speaker, seemed to be genuinely interested in the information provided and seemed to embrace the idea of possibly reviewing the current laws on cannabis. There were many suggestions, Mr. Speaker, including manufacturing of not just cannabis and cannabidiol oils, CBD oils. Mr. Speaker, the general concerns expressed were the abuse of cannabis used by the youth and the farmers, and Rastafarians being marginalized by the creation of the new industry. The religious groups, though hesitant at first, agreed that once properly regulated, the initiative could be of benefit to the economy. Opinions and suggestions regarding cannabis regulations, market control, criminal records, educational programs were all noted. Mr. Speaker, at a starting point, the Commission recommends that cases where persons incarcerated at the Bordelais Correctional Facility, whether on remand or serving sentences related to the infraction of the Drugs Prevention of Misuse Act, be reviewed by a committee appointed pursuant to the terms of Section 74 and 75 of the Constitution of St. Lucia. Where it is found that simple possession is the reason for incarceration, then the person should be pardoned or the charges dropped. The Commission further suggests that retroactivity be used to correct past injustices, such as expungement of criminal records. Other recommendations that were made, Mr. Speaker, was that cannabis, marijuana, should be declassified as a dangerous drug or narcotic in all legislation and reclassified as a controlled substance. CARICOM states should act to remove prohibition status from cannabis, marijuana, substituting the current prohibitive criminal sanction regime with legal and social policy that emphasizes public health, education, and human rights. CARICOM states should have a margin of appreciation as to how to achieve this ultimate goal, either complete and immediate removal of all prohibitive legal provisions, thereby rendering cannabis marijuana a legal substance which is regulated only in strictly defined circumstances, or as a preparatory step, the decriminalization of cannabis marijuana for personal use in private premises and for medical purposes. Full prohibition for children and adolescents with an appropriate age limit should be maintained, except for medical reasons. However, young people who use marijuana will be directed to treatment and diversion programs rather than being prosecuted or criminalized. The law, Mr. Speaker, should enact legal definitions of hemp based on low tetrahydrocannabinol or THC levels, and make clear distinctions between hemp and other varieties of cannabis, and ensuring that all legal sanctions be removed from hemp and hemp production. Legislation should provide for the protection of seeds, strains of cannabis through intellectual property mechanisms. Customs law should be amended to make provision for the import and export of cannabis and cannabis products as appropriate. To avoid the implications of anti-money laundering and proceeds of crime legislation, which currently prohibit legitimate banking and other financial transactions for illegal cannabis, commercial cannabis activities will need to be legalized. There should be a limit on the set amount of cannabis legally in the possession of any person at any one time. The Commission recommends a limit of 30 grams. Possession of larger amounts should create criminal liability varying in intensity based on the amount in excess. Small farmers and small business persons should be included in production and supply arrangements with appropriate controls limiting large enterprise and foreign involvement. An equitable land use policy for marijuana cultivation should be formulated. Special provision should be made to protect religious rights in the new regime. Retroactivity should be used as a tool to correct past injustices such as expungement of criminal records and CSME rules. Restrictions that support no public smoking and vaping of cannabis in alignment with tobacco smoking and vaping restrictions should be adopted. Cannabis or marijuana, cannabis and marijuana use should be banned in public spaces with appropriate exceptions for Rastafarians on religious grounds. Such restrictions should include prohibiting use in the workplace, enclosed public spaces, on health authority and school board property, transit shelters, common areas of apartment, building, and community care facilities. In particular, Mr. Speaker, measures that ban consumption in places frequented by children should be adopted. States should regulate the location of marijuana retail establishments by ensuring an appropriate distance from playgrounds and schools, and also prohibiting stores that sell other products to minors from selling marijuana. Regulations should be aimed at reducing the likelihood of children accidentally ingesting marijuana. States with legal marijuana can regulate the appearance, packaging, and labeling of products likely to be appealing to youth, such as marijuana-infused candy and baked goods. Limit marijuana's appeal by implementing restrictions on marketing through traditional media, such as billboards, televisions, radios, and newspaper. Retail availability of marijuana should be tightly regulated. States should develop licensing policies applying to all actors in the recreational marijuana supply chain, including retailers. Apply limits of allowable THC in products. Drug driving regulations should be created. Ensure appropriate and reasonable pricing to deter consumers from purchasing cannabis through illegal means. Moderate taxes should be imposed, taking care that the black market is not reinvigorated. Availability of cannabis should be limited by placing caps on retail density and hours of sale. Environmental conservation and preservation must guide commercial marijuana activities. Public education programs should be prioritized. A data collection system to track processes and outcomes should be established. Regular performance evaluations should be conducted to guide policy refinements. Mr. Speaker, in the liberalized regime for cannabis or marijuana, its availability as medicine should take into consideration the following. Access to medical marijuana should be made for qualifying conditions in which there is a clear evidence of its therapeutic effects and for debilitating life-threatening conditions that are intractable to treatment in which there is evidence of possible benefits. For example, disastrous and intractable seizures in children. The smoking of marijuana should be discouraged, except in persons with terminal conditions in which benefits may outweigh the risk. Measures should be put in place to regulate the market, to minimize diversion into the illegal market, example, track and trace systems. Measures should be put in place to support public health education, prevention, and treatment. A comprehensive and effective sustained health education campaign should be made priority moving forward. Ministry of Health should facilitate all key stakeholders in a comprehensive substance abuse mitigation strategy that would address risk factors. Support for research to explore and confirm beneficial and harmful effects of marijuana. Mr. Speaker, with that being said, Mr. Speaker, and now that all the consultations has been complete, the Cabinet of Ministers charged with the information that I have summarized today, we believe that it is sufficiently informed to make a decision on the matter and undertakes, Mr. Speaker, to examine all the information and in short order advise on the way forward with respect to a cannabis framework in St. Lucia. Mr. Speaker, I wish to take the time to thank all the members of the Cannabis Commission and all who took part in the various consultations for the contribution, Mr. Speaker, and I look forward, Mr. Speaker, for the advancement of the various recommendations that were made. Thank you very much.
Minister for Tourism, Information, Broadcasting, Culture and Creative Industries.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise to update the Honorable House on the resumption of commercial flights into St. Lucia, which commenced on July 9th with much success. While COVID-19 continues to obliterate progress made in the global and regional and local economy, travel and tourism continues to be one of the worst affected sectors in the world. In St. Lucia, Mr. Speaker, nearly 1,400 jobs have been affected due to the fallout of the local economy. 14,000 rather. 14,000, thank you for the correction, I'll remember. 14,000 jobs have been affected due to the fallout of the local economy from the COVID global pandemic and its debilitating effects on travel and tourism. In a phased approach to reopening our borders on June 4th, the government of St. Lucia sought to institute robust protocols aimed at prioritizing health and safety of the people of St. Lucia. Mr. Speaker, guided by our command center, the Cabinet of Ministers initially conceived a pre-testing regime within 48 hours of arrivals for customers coming from around the world. But the aviation sector found this a burdensome requirement. Following this, Mr. Speaker, we saw the local hotel industry advancing strongly, that the sector could collapse eventually if the government and the aviation industry could not come to a timely consensus. On the one hand, Mr. Speaker, we had the commercial interest, and on the other hand, the ever-present public health danger. This government, Mr. Speaker, chose to prioritize the public health interest. While some of our neighbors, Mr. Speaker, chose to abandon the testing requirement altogether in the first instance, St. Lucia chose to stand firm and effectively delayed the operationalization of our reopening. However, upon review and consultation with our stakeholders, we made a calculated and measured decision to expand the number of days that one can obtain a test before arriving to our shores from 48 hours to 7 days. Again, Mr. Speaker, we considered the public health interest first. Mr. Speaker, thus far, total arrivals from July 9th to July 20th is now at 1,635 arrivals, of which 1,085 are visitors, with the remainder being returning nationals stranded abroad. Mr. Speaker, I'm very happy to report that we've been able to place most of the returning nationals in quarantine facilities, Mr. Speaker, where we have a regime in place with 350 hotel rooms operational. Mr. Speaker, of the 40 airport swabs tested to date, we have only had one positive case, a returning national. And Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to report that that individual has been effectively quarantined, is under medical supervision, and is recovering well. With this initial resumption of business, Mr. Speaker, some 1,800 tourism jobs have been reactivated. They are as follows: 1,400 hotel jobs, 400 jobs within the taxi sector, and Mr. Speaker, dozens within the excursion and an increased amount of staff at the Urinora International Airport. Mr. Speaker, there is no easy way to manage tourism during COVID, and the public health advice suggests a fair amount of risk involved when one takes into consideration the high rates of incidence in our tourism markets. Mr. Speaker, we see in the case of the U.S., instead of a decline in the number of cases, we see increases in particular geographies in the United States. Mr. Speaker, while some submarkets within the geography of our main market show increases in cases, others show signs of improvement. This bodes well for the continued advancement of our national response to COVID as we deliberate over phase 4 of our response, the phased and strategic reopening of our economy. This, Mr. Speaker, has proven to be a lot more feasible and resulted in the activation of at least 3 airlines, American Airlines, JetBlue, and Delta Airlines, flying to St. Lucia with a collective 14 flights on a weekly basis, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, please allow me the opportunity to inform the House that every effort is being made to strengthen the enforcement of our various protocols to ensure sustainability of our resumption of tourism. While we remain committed to the public health aspirations, we're equally committed to returning our people back to gainful employment. Mr. Speaker, with these words, I thank you.
Papers to be laid. Oh, sorry. Honorable
Thank you,
Minister for
Mr.
Economic
Speaker.
Affairs.
In the statement by ministers this morning, Mr. Speaker, I will give an update in two parts on the establishment or the commencement of the DigiGov platform and the results that we have been seeing. Self-registration on the DigiGov platform began on the 15th of June 2020 in an effort to give users the opportunity to view the portal and gain some general user feedback. It was also done to begin data cleanup, as an estimated 6% of the overall driver's license data was identified as having some minor inconsistencies with integrity checks when integrity checks were conducted. We went live, Mr. Speaker, on the 25th of June 2020. The system went live with two services: renewal of driver's license, replacement of driver's license for lost, stolen, or damaged licenses. The legal and regulatory environment. To facilitate the government's digital transformation agenda, key legislation had to be enacted or commenced. A modern and responsive legal and regulatory framework is key to the success of our digital transformation agenda. As we streamline public service processes through the use of ICT, it is necessary to ensure the business climate in St. Lucia has the necessary legal and regulatory support to facilitate a fair and efficient public service delivery. We have begun this process as part of the implementation of the DigiGov project with the partial commencement of the Electronic Transaction Act number 16 of 2011, which came into effect on the 25th of June 2020. Mr. Speaker, this piece of legislation had been passed in Parliament but was not given a commencement date, and I thank my colleague Minister for Information and Broadcasting who brought this piece of regulation into commencement time so that we could operate legally. We are also working towards the partial commencement of the Data Protection Act of 2011, as this is another key piece of legislation to support implementation of the DigiGov platform. To date, Mr. Speaker, I will just give a brief summary. As of the 19th of June, we had 167 persons registered on the platform. As of the 17th of July, which is just a little less than a month, we have 753 persons registered on the DigiGov platform and accessing services. So far, Mr. Speaker, 257 people who use the platform made payments. Coming to the counter at the ministry, a total of $71,475, and online payments at Bank of St. Lucia, 145 persons made online payments totaling $39,175. So from the DigiGov platform, $110,650 have been collected, and these revenues are going straight into the government's consolidated funds. In phase 2 of the project, Mr. Speaker, we expect to see in August of 2020 application for driver's license endorsement, learner's permit, application for issue of provisional driver's license, renewal of learner's permit, registration for driving practical test, registration for driving theory test, renewal of driver's license, exceptional cases, new service may be required. Also in August, on the phase 3 of the project, application for omnibus endorsement, omnibus learner's permit, renewal of omnibus learner's permit, registration for omnibus driver's practical test, registration for omnibus driving theory test. And in November, we expect to begin, November of this year, Mr. Speaker, vehicle registration, that is regular new registration, vehicle registration built and assembled. So if you did some work on a vehicle here, then, and you change engine or chassis, that can be done, the transaction online. Vehicle registration for members of parliament. All members of parliament with the MP plates will be able in November to apply online for the renewal of the necessary transactions pertaining to their vehicles. Vehicle registration, taxi permit, vehicle registration, renewal, deregistration, fleet licensing, change of information on motor vehicle, license plate, engine, and registered owner, transfer of ownership of motor vehicles, request for information on driver, request for information on vehicle, permit to operate a public commuter transport route, new renewal or replacement, importation of left-hand drive vehicles. Everyone knows that you require a permit. Most times the vehicles get to the port and then they realize as a left-hand drive they need a permit. All of these you would be able to apply for online and get the permission online to be able to bring in a left-hand drive vehicle. License plate numbers, reservation, deregistration, personalized license plates, visitors permit books, registration, issuance of books, and reconciliation. All of these services will be available as of November. And in February of 2021, parking permits for persons with disabilities, garage inspections, motor vehicle mechanical and electrical inspection, garage inspection, certification of garage, certification of inspectors, driving instructors, theory tests, practical tests, all of these you would be able to register for online. Car dealers registration, so no longer would the persons, the companies selling vehicles have to go and take a long line at the ministry. From the very establishment, they will be able to process the registration of these new vehicles. Garage inspection, insurance of inspection books, replacement of route bands, motorcycle learner's permit, theory test, car dealer's license, car rental company license. All of these transactions will be available by February of 2021. The application of the digital government platform has been a new and interesting pursuit that the government has embarked upon. It seeks to enhance not only the operations of the Transport Division, but to one day revamp the entire government service with 154 services across 8 ministries being offered on the government platform, DG platform. Thus far, the project has been moving forward tenaciously despite the challenges posed by COVID-19. The Division of Transport has taken a team approach with the Ministry of the Public Service in an effort to provide a more efficient and timely service. The Division of Transport has launched the new driver's license with new designs and additional security features from the 25th of June 2020. And a lot of persons are paying $25, Mr. Speaker, because they are so in love with the new driver's license that they are giving up the old card. So if you want a new card, you just pay the fee of $25 and you can get a new license printed. You can apply online for it. Since the said date, customers have been who have had to process renewals and replacements have since been receiving the new driver's license card with a 3 to 5 day period with an email or text message notification indicating that the card is ready for collection. Mr. Speaker, in the past it took us 3 to 6 months sometimes to get your driver's license. Today, when you apply and you pay for your driver's license, within 3 to 5 days, you will get a text message notifying you that your driver's license is ready and you can collect it. We hope as DigiGov continues that it would be given to you within 5 minutes of paying for the driver's license. The division is currently up to date with the printing of driver's license cards, so no longer will it be hold a receipt. In an effort to curb the waiting time and long lines at the Transport Division, implemental changes were necessary. Some of these changes, Mr. Speaker, the division is now offering a service of online to the public. These services are now available 24/7, making it easier and more convenient for persons to access the services and thus reducing the processing time. There are 2 services that are currently online, as we have already the replacement of driver's license. The division has service bureau agents on the floor facilitating the process of online applications and processing of payments using debit cards for renewal and replacement. So you can fill it out online and you can go to the ministry in person. There will be an agent to just swipe your card if you don't pay from your card at home or at another institution. The service bureau agents at the division are available to assist customers who have difficulty using the system. As soon as of July 27, the division is looking forward to the additional services that will be launched on the platform, and that I have already highlighted. In addition to the DigiGov online platform, the Division of Transport also found it necessary to implement changes in the workflow in an effort to provide a more efficient service, allowing for less processing time. When you go to the supermarkets, you see a line that says 10 items or less, the express line. What we have done is establish an express line at the Department of Transport. In this regard, the division has implemented an express line for transactions which may be done in a timely manner. For example, change of information, renewal and replacement without debit cards, information inquiry from data registry, just to name a few. So you don't have to take the line where there are long transactions, where you have to wait for an hour. You go on the express line, and you should be out of there in quick time. Due to the increase in the volume of new learners, applications for customers and driving school transactions, it was necessary to assign a work clerk for the specific task. In addition of the rising demand of driving school-related transactions, a new examiner has been added to the cadre of examiners in the division to facilitate those persons, especially dealing with the backlog of COVID and not being able to process the number of persons for practical tests at the ministry. Regarding other services, there are 3 other clerks attending to new registrations and change of ownership transaction in the division. In conclusion, Mr. Speaker, the idea of digitizing the government is an amazing idea, long overdue, and the Division of Transport is elated to be the first one to take advantage of this opportunity. We advise and encourage persons as much as possible to sign up for access to the online service. And to do so, you go to www.digigov.govt.lc. And you just click on the sign up button in the far right hand corner of the platform, and that allows for transactions. To register, one should have a valid email address and an NIC number. To this point, the system has brought great improvement to the transport department. Even with the challenges experienced, working towards a better and more improved transport division and better delivery of government services through the DigiGov platform. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the report I'm going to provide today, Mr. Speaker, is with regards to the Grindberg matter, an update on where we are. I'd also like to inform the House that it would be my intention very soon to deal with the first side of Grindberg at a later date, very soon, in terms of how we ended into the agreement in the first place and where we stand. But this morning, Mr. Speaker, I certainly want to give a report as to where we are currently with the Grindberg matter. Just by way of some historical background, Mr. Speaker, on the 29th of March 2000, RSM Productions Corporation, owned by Jack Grindberg, and the government of St. Lucia entered into an exclusive oil exploration license, which license covered a specified area off the coast of St. Lucia. On the 29th of March of 2012, some 12 years later, Mr. Speaker, RSM instituted arbitration proceedings against St. Lucia for breach of that said agreement. This was due to a boundary dispute which developed, affecting the specified area, particularly in relation to Martinique, Barbados, and Vincent, and which prevented RSM from initiating the exploration. RSM contended that the agreement was still valid and invoked the force majeure principle. St. Lucia contended that the agreement had in fact expired. On the 6th of September 2013, Mr. Speaker, St. Lucia filed an application for RSM to pay security for cost in the form of an irrevocable bank guarantee in the sum of $750,000 US, and for RSM also to pay all costs in advances. So, for the tribunal to proceed, Mr. Speaker, and considering Mr. Greinberg's company's reputation of binding states into arbitration, and not necessarily always acting in good faith, Mr. Speaker, the state asked that he put down $750,000 US in an irrevocable bank guarantee, so that if in fact that he would have lost the case, the state would not have to be hunting for the money. On the 13th of August 2014, Mr. Speaker, pursuant to the application filed by St. Lucia, RSM was ordered to pay all costs and advances and to pay security for costs in the form of a revocable bank guarantee in the sum of $750,000 within 30 days. So, Mr. Speaker, the tribunal acquiesced to the state's request, requiring Mr. Greinberg to pay a guarantee of $750,000 and gave him 30 days to do so. 6 months later, Mr. Speaker, the 15th of December 2014, RSM informed of its inability to pay the security for cost as ordered. So remember, Mr. Speaker, they were given actually 30 days. We're talking some 6 months later that they indicated they could not do so. So on the 24th of December 2014, Mr. Speaker, St. Lucia then filed for the discontinuation of the arbitration proceedings in light of RSM's inability. So in essence, Mr. Speaker, we applied to the court, to the tribunal, to say Mr. Greinberg cannot acquiesce to the decision of the tribunal, and therefore the case should be dismissed. On the 13th of October 2015, almost 10 months later, Mr. Speaker, although RSM was given an additional 6 months to pay, RSM continued not to make the requisite payments for security costs. That's now a year plus later, Mr. Speaker. On the 15th of July 2016, RSM's inability or failure to pay for the security for costs in the matter resulted in RSM's claim being dismissed by the tribunal. On the 12th of November 2016, some 5 months later, being dissatisfied, RSM appealed the matter, challenging inter alia the powers of the tribunal. On the 29th of April 2019, Mr. Speaker, consequent on the challenge, an ad hoc committee of the tribunal decided the following. A, the tribunal's award is partially annulled to the extent that it concludes that RSM's prayers for relief are dismissed with prejudice. B, the costs covering the ad hoc committee membership fees and expenses, the ICSID, which is the tribunal fees, and either direct expenses as determined by the ICSID Secretariat shall be borne on the basis of 1/3 to be paid by St. Lucia and 2/3 by RSM. And C, that RSM shall bear its own legal costs and expenses and owe 1/3 of the legal costs of the expenses of St. Lucia. So in essence, what the tribunal indicated, Mr. Speaker, is that the first decision of the tribunal to dismiss the case with prejudice, meaning that RSM could not appeal the matter. The appeal tribunal reversed that decision and said the case is dismissed, but that they removed and gave it without prejudice, which means that if RSM wants to proceed to pursue the case, they can do so. They also decided, Mr. Speaker, that the cost of our legal fees would be, that they would be responsible fully for their own legal fees, and that they would pay 1/3 of the legal fees for St. Lucia, and similarly the cost of the tribunal court, 2/3 of that cost would be borne by RSM, and 1/3 of that cost would be borne by St. Lucia. Mr. Speaker, the determining issue which was challenged had to do with the decision by the tribunal to discontinue the proceedings with prejudice, as I indicated. The committee found that while the tribunal had the power to discontinue the claims for RSM's failure to pay for the security cost, doing so with prejudice effectively constituted a dismissal of the claim on the merits. Therefore, the committee found that the tribunal exceeded its powers. So A tribunal has no power under the ICSID Convention and the ICSID arbitration rules to dismiss a case on the merits without having heard arguments on the merits. So basically, simply using the fact that they could not pay, Mr. Speaker, was wrong in dismissing the case in its entirety without prejudice. This in effect means that RSM is entitled to refile arbitration proceedings against the government of St. Lucia, provided, however, that it must discharge the cost of the dismissed arbitration. So the arbitration that has happened already, they must cover those costs, and provide proper security for the cost of a new proceeding. So the $750,000 requirement still stands, Mr. Speaker, and they would have to deposit that in the form of a guarantee. Consequent on the decision, RSM is responsible to pay 2/3 of the cost and St. Lucia 1/3. The costs have been calculated as an amount of US dollars, $679,000 by counsel for St. Lucia. RSM, however, on the 29th of January 2020, proposed paying the sum of US $230,000 within 1 week, which to date, Mr. Speaker, the sum has not been paid, despite banking details being provided, nor has RSM refiled any arbitration proceedings. The fact that the issue between RSM and St. Lucia are yet to be determined on its merits means that although RSM matter has been dismissed, RSM, by reason of its ability to refile fresh arbitration upon paying the necessary costs, continues to have some leverage over St. Lucia. It means that RSM would have to pay the 2/3 cost and also 1/3 of St. Lucia's cost. Also, they would have to deposit $750,000 in the form of a guarantee. But if they were to do those things, they could now technically proceed to refile their claim. St. Lucia contends that the agreement, which was initially for 4 years and thereafter extended to 3 years, has expired. RSM, on the other hand, will likely continue to invoke the force majeure clause, which, according to them, continued the validity and binding effect of the agreement, even though the boundary dispute of Martinique, Barbados, and St. Vincent has been settled since 2017. So it means if they had settled the matter and paid the monies as expected, if in fact they wanted to continue in good faith with the agreement, and if in fact St. Lucia agreed to do so, there is no boundaries that would prevent them from now being able to proceed with the exploration as they were supposed to have done in the first instance. From all indications and general discussions, RSM continues to have an interest in oil and exploration in St. Lucia. The RSM matter must be concluded and brought to finality. Failure to do so may give rise to the possibility that if fresh arbitration is filed and an award is made to RSM's favor upholding the validity and existence of the agreement, St. Lucia could be in breach of the agreement. The uncertainty regarding the existence of the RSM agreement adversely affects St. Lucia's ability to negotiate with any other oil developer. This uncertainty cannot continue indefinitely. The government of St. Lucia has also been advised by the Council of the possibility of introducing oil exploration legislation as a strategy to provide more robust framework for future exploration discussions and agreements. This option must be and will be explored. In this connection, while the risk of a fresh arbitration still exists, it is also likely that given RSM's dilatory conduct in the first arbitration and its failure to prosecute that arbitration in a timely manner, will likely disqualify them from obtaining interim relief against the government of St. Lucia in the form of, one, an injunction to prevent further oil exploration agreements with different partners, or B, specify performance of the agreement with RSM. It is also therefore reasonable to conclude that if a new tribunal considers the merits and finds that an agreement exists between RSM and the government of St. Lucia, RSM's remedy will likely sound in damages, meaning, Mr. Speaker, that if in fact the courts were to rule in their favor and they were seen to have an agreement with the government, and if the government would have in the meanwhile proceeded with a third party, they could seek damages or could file an injunction to prevent that third party from proceeding on any further exploration. So, Mr. Speaker, this continues to be a very vexing issue for St. Lucians, and still it is amazing to me, Mr. Speaker, that members on the opposite side continue to hold their silence on this matter and have done absolutely nothing, Mr. Speaker, in order to cause the people of St. Lucia to have understood the rationale for entering into this agreement in silence, Mr. Speaker. This is an agreement in which the former Prime Minister signed the agreement without the consent of Cabinet and certainly never came to Parliament, and we all know already that he also never went to the Governor General to get the license. But I will provide a more detailed report on that aspect of the Grindberg matter at that time, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Papers to be laid. Honorable Prime Minister and Minister for Finance, Economic Growth, Job Creation, External Affairs, and the Public Service.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to lay the following papers standing in my name. Statutory Instrument Number 97, 2020, Fiscal Incentives, CPAL Holdings Incorporated Order. Statutory Instrument Number 99 of 2020, Excise Tax Amendment of Schedule 1, Number 9 Order. Statutory Instrument Number 101 of 2020, Legal Profession, Eligibility, Tanya Nazagina Catherine Alexis Francis Order. Statutory Instrument Number 102 of 2020, Legal Profession, Eligibility, Shanika Jovita Oneka Danica Carrington Order. Statutory Instrument Number 103 of 2020, Legal Profession, Eligibility, Simone Blanchet Bowman Order. Statutory Instrument Number 104 of 2020, Legal Professions, Eligibility, Kelly Marie Thompson Order. Statutory Instrument Number 105 of 2020, Legal Profession Eligibility, Mark Anthony Fulford Order. Statutory Instrument Number 106 of 2020, Legal Profession Eligibility, Andre Sean Silburn Order. Statutory Amendment Number 107 of 2020, National Insurance Corporation Economic Relief Program for COVID-19 Amendment Regulations. Statutory Instrument Number 108 of 2020. Finance Administration Act, Resolution of Parliament to borrow for capital expenditure, Human Capital Resilience Project. Statutory Instrument Number 109 of 2020. Finance Administration Act, Resolution of Parliament to borrow for capital expenditure, Caribbean Regional Communications Infrastructure Program. Statutory Instrument Number 110 of 2020, National Savings and Development Bonds Act, Resolution of Parliament to raise funds by the issue of saving bonds. Statutory Instrument Number 111A of 2020, Emergency Powers Disasters COVID-19 Curfew Number 10 Order. Statutory Instrument Number 112 of 2020, Legal Professions Eligibility, Nosoma Monifa Kumok Order. Statutory Instrument Number 113 of 2020, Legal Profession Eligibility, Marie Aj Simmons Order. Statutory Instrument Number 114 of 2020, Fiscal Incentives, Gion Holdings Incorporated Order. Statutory Instrument Number 115 of 2020, Public Health, Offensive and Hazardous Trades Amendment Regulations. Statutory Instrument 117 of 2020, Excise Tax Amendment of Schedule 1, Number 10 Order.
Honorable Minister for Infrastructure, Ports, Energy and Labour.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to lead the following papers standing in my name. Statutory Instrument Number 100 of 2020, Labour Layoff Period Extension Order. St. Lucia Air and Seaports Authority Annual Report 2016 to 2017. St. Lucia Air and Seaports Authority Annual Report 2017 to 2018.
Honorable Minister for Commerce, Industry, Enterprise Development and Consumer Affairs.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to lay the following papers standing in my name. Statutory Instrument Number 98 of 2020, Price Control Amendment Number 9 Order. Statutory Instrument Number 111 of 2020, Price Control Amendment Number 10 Order. Sorry, Mr. Speaker, I was looking at the wrong paper. Statutory Instrument Number 116 of 2020, Price Control Amendment Number 11 Order.
Honorable Minister for Tourism, Information, Broadcasting, Culture and Creative Industries.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I wish to lay the following papers standing in my name. Statutory Instrument Number 95 of 2020, Electronic Transactions Act Commencement Order. Statutory Instrument Number 96 of 2020, Tourism Incentives, Nico Storing Services Limited Amendment Order.
Motions. Honorable Prime Minister.
Speaker, I beg to move the following motion standing in my name. Whereas it is provided by Section 39(1) of the Finance Administration Act, Cap 1501, that the Minister of Finance may, by resolution of Parliament, borrow money from a bank or other financial institution for the capital expenditure of government. And whereas it is further provided under Section 42(1) of the said Act that there shall be charged on and paid out of the consolidated fund all debt charges for which the government is liable. And whereas the Minister of Finance considers it necessary to borrow an amount of US $10.7 million from the Caribbean Development Bank Special Fund Resource, SFR, to meet the ordinary capital resources, OCR debt service obligation to the Caribbean Development Bank for a period commencing from the first day of October 2020 and terminating on the 30th day of September 2021, in order to preserve the fiscal space and to be used to finance immediate essential emergency COVID-19 pandemic-related health expenditure and bolster economic and social recovery. And whereas interest is payable quarterly at a rate of 1% per annum on the amount of the principal withdrawn and outstanding from time to time. And whereas the loan is repayable in 80 equal or approximately equal and consecutive quarterly installments on each date of the first day of January, first day of April, first day of July, and the first day of October, commencing on the first day due date immediately following the expiration of 5 years after the date of the loan agreement, or a later date that the Caribbean Development Bank specifies in writing. Be it resolved that the Parliament authorizes the Minister of Finance to borrow $10.7 million from the Caribbean Development Bank Special Fund Resource, SFR, to meet the ordinary and capital resources OCR debt service obligation to the Caribbean Development Bank for a period commencing from the first day of October 2020 and terminating on the 30th day of September 2021 in order to preserve the fiscal space and to be used to finance immediate essential emergency COVID-19 pandemic-related health expenditure, bolster economic social recovery. Be it further resolved that the interest is payable quarterly at a rate of 1% per annum on the amount of the principal withdrawn and outstanding from time to time, and the loan is payable in 80 equal or approximately equal and consecutive quarterly installments on each date: the first day of January, the first day of April, first day of July, of October, commencing on the first due date immediately following the expiration of 5 years after the date of the loan agreement, or on a later date that the Caribbean Development Bank specifies in writing. Mr. Speaker, the resolution is seeking approval from the House of Parliament to borrow the sum of $10.7 million from the Caribbean Development Bank to assist with meeting the ordinary and capital resources debt service obligations to the CDB. Mr. Speaker, the COVID-19, that is the debt obligations that exist for a particular period, and that is from October 1st, 2020 until September 30th, 2021. So any debt that we have to CDB in that period has been calculated to come to $10.7 million US. Mr. Speaker, this COVID-19 pandemic has been described as being just an economically disruptive, as economically disruptive as the Great Depression of 1929 and both world wars. Social distancing protocols and the marked reduction in economic activity are having a deliberate debilitating effect on our local economy. The government's revenues have been severely impacted. In addition to loss in revenue, the impact of COVID-19 has placed added pressures on the government expenditure, as we've had to undertake additional expenditures to strengthen and expand our healthcare systems to mitigate the spread of the virus. The government has had to fund the operations of isolation and quarantine facilities, the accelerated transition from Victoria Hospital to OKU Hospital, the rehabilitation of the Victoria Hospital into a respiratory hospital, hosting the Cuban Brigade of doctors and nurses, amongst other expenditures. Additionally, the government has committed resources to provide income support to those persons who have lost their income or livelihoods as a result of coronavirus. Mr. Speaker, it has not been easy, but as a government we continue to navigate these difficult times with the overall well-being of the people of St. Lucia at the forefront of our minds. The pressure on the operations of the central government are quite real, and almost on a daily basis we are faced with tough decisions on what initiatives to prioritize. In this context, the ability to sustain our obligations associated with debt servicing have also become uncertain. Facing such a reality, our government requested a loan from the CDB to assist with meeting its debt service obligations. The CDB is a key development partner of St. Lucia and continues to provide critical support to the government of St. Lucia in periods of distress. The COVID-19 pandemic is one such event, as this global pandemic has caused unprecedented distress to individuals, businesses, and our economy. Locally, regionally, and internationally, the strongest and the largest of economies have been forced to make adjustments and to take tough decisions to be able to navigate the challenging and uncertain period. Thankfully, Mr. Speaker, although our fiscal position has been somewhat undermined, our partners such as the CDB have stepped in to provide us with assistance during our time of greatest need. Mr. Speaker, we remain actually aware of our borrowing position, the debt stock, and the debt of the GDP ratio. However, this borrowing is necessary if we are to meet our financing needs without directing resources away from the critical social and economic recovery needs. It should be noted that the terms of the loan are concessionary at 1%, with an approximate grace period which will allow us as a country sufficient time to recover before repayments are required, and that is 5 years. Given that this is concessionary loan with a low interest rate and extended maturity profile, its inclusion into the existing debt portfolio will have minimal effect on our financing cost and risk profile. Mr. Speaker, the terms of the conditions of the loan are as follows. Provision of an amount not exceeding $10,700,000. The loan shall be repaid in 8 equal or approximately equal consecutive quarterly installments, commencing after the expiry of 5 years, following the date of the loan agreement, or on such later date as the CDB may specify in writing. The interest shall be paid at a rate of 1% per annum on the amount of the loan withdrawn and outstanding from the time to time. Such interest shall be paid quarterly. The government of St. Lucia shall not be required to pay any commission on the loan nor any commitment charge on this loan amount. Mr. Speaker, this loan will permit the government to preserve some fiscal space and allow the financial resources that would have been required for debt servicing to be directed to financing other immediate needs of the country in responding to the COVID-19 pandemic and resuscitating the economy. I therefore call on this Honourable House to grant approval for this resolution.
Honourable members, the question is that Parliament authorize the Minister of Finance to borrow US $10,700,000 from the Caribbean Development Bank's Special Fund Resources, SFR, to meet the Ordinary Capital Resources, OCR, debt service obligations to the Caribbean Development Bank for a period commencing from the 1st day of October 2020 and terminating on the 40th day of September 2021 in order to preserve fiscal space and to be used to A, finance immediate essential emergency COVID-19 pandemic-related health expenditure, B, to bolster economic and social recovery. Be it further resolved that A, interest is payable quarterly at a rate of 1% per annum on the amount of the principal withdrawn and outstanding from time to time. B, the loan is repayable in 80 equal or approximately equal and consecutive quarterly installments on each due date of the first day of January, the first day of April, the first day of July, and the first day of October, commencing on the first due date immediately following the expiration of 5 years after the date of the loan agreement, or on a later due date that the Caribbean Development Bank specifies in writing. Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want to, if I can try to interpret what this loan is all about, and I hope, if I'm wrong, I can get some level of clarification. To my mind, St. Lucia had debt obligations to the CDB of approximately $10.7 million US, which is about 23 million EC dollars. And we had to pay back the CDB this $23 million between October 2020 and September 2021. And the CDB, and obviously we may not have been able to pay it, so the CDB is granting us a loan to pay themselves because we are not able to pay them. Is it similar to say that if it is a normal transaction, you are using a credit card to pay another credit card? That is to my mind what we are doing. We're using one credit card to pay another credit card. And I think if that's what we're doing, we should have explained to the people of St. Lucia that we are actually borrowing to pay, not to pay debt, but to pay what we should have been paying back. And I just need to know whether that is what we're doing. We're using one credit card to pay another credit card. So to my mind, that is what we're doing. I think that the Prime Minister should have explained it better, because we have different variations of how what St. Lucia's position is. At some point, St. Lucia is doing very well. At some point, we have a debt to GDP ratio that is below our levels, that we're doing fantastic. We have good financial management, and on another note, we have to borrow to pay debt. I think it is necessary that the people of St. Lucia get a true picture of what the economy of St. Lucia is like. We understand that COVID, the government did not cause COVID. We understand that. But what has happened is the mixed messages. One budget, you have a deficit of $500 million. Another time, you have civil servants saying you're going to inject $500 million in the economy. What really are we telling the people of St. Lucia? 1 minute, we have no money. The other minute, we are building roads and moving garbage dumps. What really are we doing? Why don't we sit and have an honest conversation with the people of St. Lucia and tell them the situation? We know elections are near. We know 4 years has actually not 40 years. 4 years are over. And regardless of what we do, tomorrow is going to be Wednesday, and the time will come. And I sat here and they laughed at me. And I said to them, you all are laughing, but 4 years is not 40 years. And they laughed and they roared. But right now the reality has come that we actually in the 5th year. So why aren't we being honest? Why aren't we saying, why we came and we explained that the debt situation was crucial? They said, no. We've borrowed less and managed the economy well because of rebasing. We said that. And right now, the chickens have come home. We see what's happening. I think the government should be honest with the people of St. Lucia. Because reality, no matter how you try to hide it. Only last week, Carrie Chris said that our debt situation, our creditworthiness, we've been downgraded. And no matter if you attack us, the fact is, that's a fact. Because our borrowing has not been selective. We've borrowed when we should not have borrowed. We've borrowed for projects that we should not have borrowed for. And we're still doing the same thing. But we believe that the way to get away with it is to abuse, to attack people, to have surrogates saying all kinds of things about them. But the reality is here. And the people of St. Lucia are seeing the reality, as was just done last week by a credit rating body. And we can't hide it. We can't hide it. We can hide it to win an election. But the reality will hit us. Just like the NIC, the reality is going to hit us. I want to urge the government to get responsible and tell the people what they really are doing. We have one credit card to pay another credit card. Having said so, Mr. Speaker, I see that this loan is to bolster economic and social recovery. Of course, there is need for economic and social recovery because COVID hit the entire world. The second is, we understand that there may be a second wave. And the literature says it may be a financial wave, worse than the first. The reality is there. But is the government really handling this economic and social recovery properly? Are the people of St. Lucia really benefiting from the economic and social recovery? Are the members of the public who support the opposition benefiting from the social and economic recovery? Mr. Speaker, sometimes in my political life, I'm baffled at the things that we try to make people pay for just for political purposes. I came here in this honorable house and I made the point, talking about social and economic recovery. I made the point about a comfort station in the Marchand Boulevard. I made a point. I said we are talking about COVID and we're talking about people washing their hands and sanitation. And I said to this government, there is a comfort station that the Caribbean Development Bank financed through the Poverty Reduction Fund in St. Lucia. And this facility has been left abandoned. I came, I pleaded. I said, it's not for me. It wasn't for me. You're talking about social and economic recovery. This government, every one of them ridiculed me. They put my picture in a toilet. You understand? Laughing. Forgetting that some of them in their youth, they had to use the same freeness. Praise God. Praise God, I never had to. They came and they ridiculed me. That was a joke. You understand? They said that I should put skyscrapers in Marchand instead of talking about a toilet facility. Talking about social and economic recovery. That's what we're talking about. Social recovery, using the $10 million social recovery. Because, Mr. Speaker, this government is self-righteous. It lives in an alternative reality. And they don't understand that all of this $10 million US that they are borrowing, they could take at least 5 million and fix 5,000 and fix the facility in the George Charles Boulevard. So regardless of whatever they say, I will say it every time I have the opportunity to say it. And if they do not do it, I'm going to write the Caribbean Development Bank and tell them that their investment of $1 million is being left to ruin by a government that wants to practice political retribution on me. Because that cannot be right, Mr. Speaker. That cannot be right. $10 million for economic and social recovery. Talking about economic recovery, Mr. Speaker, this government, they have taken up, they give out food in boxes. Sometimes they give bananas and these kind of things. I am the parliamentary rep for Cassis East. No government agency has ever come to me, Boston Economic and Social Recovery, and said to me, here is one box to distribute among your people. Not one to distribute them, not one. But what I see rejected candidates all over the place. Cell phone in hand, carrying boxes. That is the country we live in. And we speak about COVID and we are all in. That is the level of petty victimization that we have in this country, Mr. Speaker. And I will speak about it. And I hope the people who are hearing me, the people outside who pretend that this government is a government for all the people, and the platitudes that we say in our speeches and in the House. Let the people of St. Lucia tell you what they are going through. Economic and social recovery. Let's talk about the abuse that paid government surrogates deal with on us, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, I understand COVID. I know the COVID situation, but I can't understand why this government can practice so much political retribution, social and economic recovery. We are at a time when people are frustrated, Mr. Speaker. But you know, there's a little park in Toulouse, in my constituency, a little park that I built, that the government built for Taiwanese funds. There's Wi-Fi in that park, Wi-Fi. The government refuses to pay for it. Refuses. They've left the park closed. And they say, I'm supposed to open it. Of course, the park is open, but the swings are bad. The grass is not cut. The hedges are overgrown. It doesn't take, in this social economic recovery, it will not take, for my constituency, it will not cost $20,000 to do these two things. But you don't know what they intend to say? What Pierre do for Marchand? The raw politics So my people are suffering because they want to win a seat that they cannot win. So they allow the poor children in Toulouse to suffer, Mr. Speaker, to suffer. I see the kids. I know how they used to go in the park and play. I know how they used to get back. I come and I plead for it. I plead. I've written the Castries City Council, or whatever they call it, but they write me off. I mean, all kind of excuses. But I tell you, Mr. Speaker, we can get political power here. We can do what we want to do here, but there's something called retribution that we will pay at some point. It may not be political retribution, but it will be other retribution. So, Mr. Speaker, whereas I understand the need for us to find some way to build back after COVID, I'm saying to you, what this government is doing is cruel to make people suffer because they want to win an election. And I've given you two examples, two simple examples. And I want you, Mr. Speaker, let's go and see it. Let us go to the Marshall Boulevard and look at the facility. Let us go to the Tourist Park and look at the park. And you'll see what this government, the pain and the suffering that they are inflicting on the people of my constituency because they want to win the seat. So, Mr. Speaker, I hope that the economic and social recovery that we are speaking about, it is balanced, that people do not get victimized because they support the St. Lucia Labour Party, that our representatives are given at least some level of latitude to help the people who support us, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, social and economic recovery. There was a school book, there was the SSDF. They are supposed to be doing, or they used to do, relief, school book relief. Now, the government has changed it. They have people lining up in the hot sun. There are people who line up from 4 o'clock in the morning.
Honorable member, I think you may be taking your debate contributions beyond the boundaries now of the resolution.
Mr. Speaker, if I can say it, I yield.
Member for Vieux-Fort North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise to contribute to this motion by the Minister for Finance to borrow $10.7 million from the Caribbean Development Bank's Special Fund Resources SFR to meet the ordinary capital resources debt service obligations to the Caribbean Development Bank for a period commencing 1st day of October 2020 and terminating on the 30th day of September 2021. In order to preserve fiscal space and to be used to A, finance immediate essential emergency COVID-19 pandemic-related health expenditure, and B, bolster economic and social recovery. So I assume, Mr. Speaker, that either on the finance immediate essential emergency COVID-19 pandemic-related health expenditure, or on the B, bolster economic and social recovery, that I am allowed the latitude to speak about socio-political matters. Because on the B, bolster economic and social recovery clearly speaks to the government's actions and how they impact the constituents of Vieux-Fort North in the socio-political manner. But, Mr. Speaker, I wish for you to allow me to digress 1 minute just to make a brief statement about a very important issue in my constituency. Mr. Speaker, something happened in my constituency over the weekend at the Peru Catholic Church, and I am very saddened as a member of Parliament for Vieux-Fort North by the attack which was captured on film where a young man allegedly attacked a statue with an incendiary device and proceeded to threaten worshippers at the Piero Catholic Church, so much so entering the church, reaching the altar, and threatening the parishioners of the Piero Catholic Church. Mr. Speaker, this was a very sad situation, and as parliamentary representative, I condemn in the strongest possible terms this action. Mr. Speaker, this is my church, and although I visit all of the denominations in VA4 North, the Piero Church is where I visit more often than other places because I live at Piero. My home, Mr. Speaker, is just a few houses from the Catholic Church in Piero. And although I was not in church that morning, I was very sad to have seen this. I want, Mr. Speaker, as parliamentary representative, to thank all those who acted very quickly, Mr. Speaker, to effect a citizen's arrest. And you saw, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Oliver, a comrade of mine, and his son, Mr. Sole, and others from Piero acted swiftly. And what is interesting, Mr. Speaker, they prevented a possible escalation of that situation. And you saw how they brought this man down to a situation of calm. And they held his hands and brought him to the police. I also wish to applaud the policeman who's from Piero, Mr. Speaker, who took action and called in officers who were in the area. I want to say we as citizens of this peaceful and conscious constituency of VA4 North will not tolerate anyone attacking or disrespecting any of the places of worship. We have several in VA4 North, and we condemn these actions. I also call, Mr. Speaker, on all of our professionals, our counselors, our community leaders, to continue to help our youth, because while I condemn these attacks in the strongest possible manner, we must also find a way through the professionals, the counselors, the youth leaders, the football leaders, and all of us in the community must find a way to find out and to observe when our youth are troubled so that we can continue to seek help for them, Mr. Speaker. I know this young man's mother, and I know she's a strong Catholic. She's always in church, and there's no way his family will ever condone this kind of behavior. It's very sad, Mr. Speaker, and I wish as parliamentary rep to state that we condemn it, and we ask everyone in the community to continue to help our youth and continue to protect our places of worship. So thank you, Mr. Speaker. There were some other unsavory incidents. I wish not to grace the Parliament with the nasty vagaries of what else we saw. We will speak about it at another place. But Mr. Speaker, no, we are not speaking in Parliament, not at all. But Mr. Speaker, going back to the motion, this motion, Mr. Speaker, is to finance immediate and essential emergency COVID-19 pandemic-related health expenditure, and I repeat, to bolster economic and social recovery. Mr. Speaker, every time we speak about COVID-19 and the impacts of COVID-19 in this Parliament, I ask this question, and my colleagues have also asked this question. Can the government of St. Lucia give the Parliament and the people of St. Lucia a report on the expenditure related to COVID-19 to date, to the COVID-19 response to date? The government has been silent on this matter. We are here once again, Mr. Speaker, to borrow $10.7 million from the CDB. This amounts to 28.836 million EC dollars. Kosa, Mr. Speaker, nous avons le gouvernement qui prend en dette, en loan, qui presque 29 millions de dollars à l'argent ici, l'argent nous a servi ici. That is on top of the $77 million from the IMF, plus other funds, Mr. Speaker, which this government has secured or has access to. What I'm saying simply is this. If every time we come to the Parliament to borrow money for expenditure on the COVID-19 response, isn't it a responsible action for the government to give us an update, Mr. Speaker, on what has happened so far? When we came to extend the state of emergency, I asked the same question, Mr. Speaker. How much has the government spent on relief efforts so far? How much has the government spent on the alterations to the Iwanora International Airport and to VG and to the ports and so on? What are the contracts worth? The government, Mr. Speaker, is not providing any answers where that is concerned. This morning I heard ministers made statements by ministers, and no minister made any statement about these matters. As a member of Parliament for Vieux North, Mr. Speaker, I continue to ask the government to give us an account of the expenditure related to COVID-19, to the COVID-19 response. Gouvernement pas qu'à dire nous combien l'argent est dépensé, en laisse différents sujets qui qu'a fait, il dit pour aider les gens pour combattre COVID-19. Gouvernement quand est venu dire, oh, il a fait un bon travail avec COVID-19, mais personne ne savent quantité l'argent que le gouvernement a dépensé. Et ça, c'est un bagage qui a trois cassé moi, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I have asked this over and over and over again. And in this regard, let us go back to A. The motion indicates that this is to finance immediate essential emergency COVID-19 pandemic-related health expenditure. What exactly does this mean? The Prime Minister, as usual, expects this Parliament to just take his word for it. So he comes to the Parliament again and simply says they need to expend money to work on the impacts of COVID-19, but in the motion, there is no explanation. What exactly are we going to spend the money on? Pandemic health-related expenditure. What does that mean? What does this mean? Can the Prime Minister itemize how much money are we going to spend on PPEs, protective equipment? What does it mean? Does it mean another booth at Iwanora International Airport? There are constituents from Vieux North who work at the Iwanora International Airport. Many of them from Pierrot and from Grace. Some of them from Bellevue. Some of them from Kako and Savan. I want to be able to tell them that the Prime Minister said he will spend $4 million to ensure that they are safe since the government has reopened the airports and so on. Is it unreasonable, Mr. Speaker, as a member of Parliament, to ask the government, the Prime Minister, to tell us these things? Is it unreasonable? Est-ce que je peux demander trois questions? Je peux demander au gouvernement, qui ça il a fait avec tout l'argent ça là? Presque 29 millions de dollars. Comme ça, le gouvernement ça a payé l'argent, Mr. Speaker. When they go around and tell people they don't have money, COVID-19 is a problem, le gouvernement a payé l'argent. Avec yo pas qu'à dire nous ça yo qu'a fait avec tout millions de dollars ça là. I'm asking the Prime Minister to tell us what this money is going to do. Mr. Speaker, I spoke about the workers at the airport from Vieux North. I spoke about safety and safety gear. I know a young lady from Vieux North called Glory, and every day we speak about how the work areas at the airport should be secured. And she's always worried about her family. Are we guaranteed that with this $29 million, people like her will be safe as we open our borders? Mr. Speaker, I heard the Prime Minister said that the government of St. Lucia applied to the CDB because of their concern and all kinds of things like that. If you go to the CDB website, Mr. Speaker, today, as we speak, use your phone, your computers, and people who are listening at home and watching, can go to their phones right now and you can just type CDB COVID-19 response and you will see this article. And on May 18, 2020, there was an article by the CDB. And the CDB has indicated in this article that they are making emergency loans to 7 Caribbean countries: Antigua and Barbuda, 13 million, Belize, 15 million, Dominica, 2.5 million, Grenada, 5.9, St. Lucia, 10.8, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, 11.3, Suriname, 8.2, US. Am I to assume that this is the same facility that we are talking about here today? So it is a Caribbean-wide facility by the CDB. And St. Lucia will access $28.836 million EC. So it is very clear, Mr. Speaker, that this government has received or will receive monies to help people. And listen to what the CDB has indicated. And this is from the same article by the CDB. And I quote, Mr. Speaker, from the CDB, the provision of support to the 7 countries to respond to COVID-19 and keep critical government services and operations running is urgent to halt the economic decline and minimize social hardship while giving focused attention to the most vulnerable, unquote. This is according to the CDB president, Dr. Warren Smith. So the rationale for this $28 million, for the $29 million, let me just go back. To halt economic decline, minimize social hardship, while giving focused attention to the most vulnerable. Mr. Speaker, baklan ko gouvernement ka prend l'argent ça là, ka dit, raison ka baisse l'argent ça, c'est pour gouvernement empêcher l'économie pays à descendre plus en faillite. Baklan ka dit ka baisse l'argent ça pour empêcher les affaires sociales viennent plus mauvais. Avec pour gouvernement baille attention pour monde qui en plus difficulté. En anglais, on a créé ça most vulnerable. Monde qui plus aisé pour yo ni toi avec difficulté à la vie. Most vulnerable. So the test, Mr. Speaker, is whether the government will use the $29 million to focus attention on the most vulnerable. C'est ça moi kamade. So that's why I'm asking the Prime Minister to give us details. What are you going to do with the money? The CDB, Mr. Speaker, once again has indicated that we need to focus on the most vulnerable. Mr. Speaker, this same report further states, and I quote again from the CDB, it is expected that the social impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic will be significant, stemming from an increase in unemployment, loss of income and livelihoods, as well as children, persons with disabilities, indigenous people, and migrants as the most vulnerable groups, unquote. So this $29 million, how much of it will go to children? How much of it will go to people with disabilities? These are the questions. Parce que c'est pour ça yo bay gouvernement la loan nan, Mr. Speaker. C'est pour ça. We have seen instances where this government has taken loans, the $77 million from the IMF, and the money for the loans, that money has gone to all kinds of things. Transferring beau séjour, building bridges, all kinds of things. So it's very important, Mr. Speaker, for the government to explain how it's going to benefit, how this money will benefit children, persons living with disabilities, and so on. Mr. Speaker, this is very, very important. As a member of Parliament for Vieux-Fort North, just like many other constituencies, so many people from Vieux-Fort North lost their jobs at the Coconut Bay Hotel and other hotels. So many of them. Will these people, Mr. Speaker, get additional cash assistance based on this $29 million? I spoke to a family, Mr. Speaker, close to Mornon Drew in Vieux-Fort North. The lady worked at a hotel, the husband worked in the tourism sector. Both of them unemployed. They have children to send to school. What people like that want to find out is whether they will get assistance from all of these monies, this $29 million. The small businesses, Mr. Speaker, to halt economic decline, whether these people will get assistance, all of those small shops, and there are over 175 of them in Vieux-Fort North. The second part of the motion said to bolster economic and social recovery, whether these small business people will get assistance. How will this money bolster economic recovery of these small micro businesses in Vieux-Fort North? What about musicians who work at the hotels? There are many bands in Vieux-Fort North who work at the hotels. Are these people counted in the economic recovery that this loan is supposed to assist with? And again, I go back to the motion. B, bolster economic and social recovery, Mr. Speaker. The farmers who sell to the hotels from Vieux-Fort North, are they going to get assistance? The fishers who today, I was coming up through Trois-Pitons, and I found 3 of them at the back of Suzuki, one Suzuki vehicle, one Toyota Hiace, and another diner truck selling fish this morning in containers. Are these people going to get assistance, Mr. Speaker? All night long, they're selling fish all around St. Lucia. Are they going to get assistance from this $29 million loan? And what about increases in unemployment? How are we going to bolster social recovery, Mr. Speaker, related to the reopening of school, registration of students, social recovery? Will the government assist parents by paying the registration of all secondary school students? What about the primary school students? These are the kinds of things we need to do to assist with this COVID-19 pandemic and the negative impacts. The SSDF, Mr. Speaker, is giving some assistance. But the people from Vieux-Fort North who have been to the office in Vieux-Fort, where the SSDF is doing all of these interviews, many of them are frustrated. They only see a few people, and then, Mr. Speaker, all of these, the interviews, and some of them have said to me this morning that they are only getting uniforms, and they are being told they'll get books, not this year, but next year. And these are the same people who are not working as a result of COVID-19. All I'm saying here, Mr. Speaker, that this motion speaks to bolstering social recovery. And in my constituency, just as every other constituency, the parents who are working and who lost their jobs as a result of COVID-19 need some assistance to help with their social situation. Mr. Speaker, I will continue. In addition to school books, so many people lost their livelihoods and they have to pay for transportation for their children. Can this government tell us today, Mr. Speaker, that because of COVID-19, all children who require transportation for secondary school will get free transportation, Mr. Speaker? We are living in extraordinary times. And they will not specify it, Mr. Speaker, because they do not want us to know exactly what they're doing with the money. And what about the fishers? I go back to them. The nearshore fishers, Mr. Speaker, the pot fish fishers, those who had to stay home for over 2 months, are they getting assistance from this $29 million? Each of these people, Mr. Speaker, would have made over $4,000 between March 26th and now. But because of the lockdowns and because they could not go to sea, Mr. Speaker, they could not make over $4,000. All I'm saying, they had to do it because of the COVID-19 pandemic. I want to know Mr. Speaker, I want to know, Mr. Speaker, whether they will get assistance from this $29 million. And you all can gesticulate as you want.
Mr. Speaker, I stand on a point of order.
Mr. Speaker, what point of order?
Mr. Speaker, the member continues to mislead the House with the information that he's given. The resolution, the motion is clear, Mr. Speaker, that the money is to pay the debts that are owed to CDB for the year from this time until September next year. There's no money coming to the government. This is debt. The member for Castries is got it right when he said it's like taking a debt, using one credit card to pay another credit card. The member for Beaufort North consistently misleads the House by saying that the $29 million can be used for this and can be used for that. Mr. Speaker, that is simple. That is simple to understand. The member needs to withdraw everything that he has said here because nothing is in relation to the bill that is before, the motion that's before the House.
Honorable members, I listened to the Prime Minister presenting the motion, and rightly so, Honorable Member, that's what he said. However, if you read the resolution itself, it seems to be given a little extra whiff to the line. So if you go to the line...
I'll answer you.
No, you won't.
Sorry.
If you go to the line, in order to preserve fiscal space and to be used too, it seems to give that little leeway here. Honorable Member, so it gives this little leeway, Honorable Member, for him to ask if monies are being used locally. Continue, Honorable Member Beaufort now.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm debating the motion that was presented to me. I was a teacher for
Honorable Member, continue.
23 years and I can read.
Honorable Member, make your presentation.
Mr. Speaker, it says, A, to finance essential COVID-19 pandemic-related health expenditure, and B, to bolster economic and social recovery. So what is this member talking about? I don't know what I'm saying. Mr. Speaker, let me continue. The fishers who require assistance, whatever fiscal space you're talking about in this motion. And I went to the CDB, the article by the CDB, to give the rationale for the loans to the Caribbean islands. I went and quoted.
Honorable Member.
So, Mr. Speaker, the fishers, I'll continue, Mr. Speaker. The fishers require assistance based on the impact from COVID-19. The vendors from Beaufort North, Mr. Speaker. There are over 200 vendors. Have they received assistance based on the impacts of COVID-19? And we have spoken about the children with disabilities. So, Mr. Speaker, I continue to ask two things. That this government gives a report about their expenditure so far on COVID-19 related activities, and that this money from the CDB and the fiscal space that it allows, the opportunity cost, the fiscal space, the funds that will be generated, Mr. Speaker, be used to assist the people of Beaufort North and the people of St. Lucia who have suffered as a result of the impacts of COVID-19, to assist them, and not for this government to use this as a cover for all other activities within the government, Mr. Speaker. I continue to say in the constituency, when we are clamoring for assistance to our people who have suffered from COVID-19, and as the leader of the opposition has said, the people who are given access to millions of dollars, hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of opportunities in contracts are the people who want to contest elections for the United Workers' Party in Beaufort North. That's a fact. Cannot be disputed. That's a fact. And so the Member of Parliament for Vieux North, in the response to COVID-19, in employment and contracts for the bushing and all of that, it is the people, again I will say, the people who want to run elections for them in Vieux North are the ones given the access to hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of contracts.
Honorable.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I end my contribution, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Honorable Prime Minister. Yes. Member for Library.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I just want to comment briefly on this resolution. And I rise not in a very happy mode. I don't believe that we are in a good place. And I rise with unbridled concern for my crisis-laden homeland. Mr. Speaker, this resolution is requesting the approval of the House to permit the Minister to borrow $10.7 million from the Caribbean Development Bank Special Fund Resources, SFR, which is the concessionary window of the bank for the purpose of meeting the ordinary capital resources. Debt obligation of St. Lucia to the Caribbean Development Bank for a period commencing October 1st, 2020 and terminating on September 30th, 2021. Mr. Speaker, this loan, according to the resolution, is supposed to preserve fiscal space and to be used to finance immediate essential emergency COVID-19 pandemic-related health expenditure and to bolster economic and social recovery. In other words, Mr. Speaker, CDB is giving us a concessionary loan to pay for our debt obligations that we owe them for a period of 1 year from October 1st, 2020 to September 30th, 2021. The direct analogy of this would be that you are taking a loan to pay off your debt obligations for another loan, as clearly articulated by the leader of the opposition, member for Casris East. The idea is that if we give the economy some breathing space to recover and allow the government to finance critical health-related expenditure and to promote economic and social recovery. This sounds a bit like the rapid credit facility of the IMF loan, where the money was supposed to have been utilized for critical health expenditure, income support, and cash transfers. The only difference in this case is that the government will not be getting any money. But to use the money, it would have paid to CDB for debt obligations, for the health expenditures, and bolster economic and social recovery. We cannot trust this government to do this, Mr. Speaker, knowing that they use the IMF, RCF resources for capital projects. The resolution clearly says to preserve the fiscal space. And I would like to ask, what fiscal space, Mr. Speaker? It is important for the Minister of Finance to present a report on the state of finances of the country in order to determine whether we have any more fiscal space or whether the government has completely eroded the fiscal space that was available, Mr. Speaker. Secondly, I would like to ask whether the Minister of Finance has drawn up an expenditure plan to show how these funds, which were to be used to pay the debt obligations, will be used in meeting the purposes of this loan. Mr. Speaker, my biggest concern is the status of our debt and our capacity to meet our debt service obligations. If GDP falls by 18% in 2020, as indicated by the Minister for Finance, which is the ECCB's latest projection, this would mean that our GDP at current market prices would drop significantly from EC $5.73 billion in 2019 to EC $4.699 billion. Our debt stock would grow by the extent of the net financing requirements of this year's budget, as indicated by the estimates of expenditure for 2020-2021, and on page 71 of the Prime Minister's budget presentation. It would move the debt stock from 3.42 billion in 2019 to 3.98 billion. Mr. Speaker, St. Lucia's debt to GDP ratio will increase significantly from 59.6% in 2019 to 84.7% in 2020. Mr. Speaker, this is a staggering increase of 25.1%, placing St. Lucia on an unsustainable debt path and into the door of the IMF. These numbers are based on the 2019 Economic and Social Review and the estimates as indicated, as well as the Prime Minister's own budget presentation, Mr. Speaker. It is to be noted that there have been two rebasing exercises in 2016 and 2019, respectively, for gross domestic product, resulting in a substantial increase in our GDP. If we were to use the economic series before rebasing, that is in 2016, the series that our administration utilized worked in 2015, our debt to GDP ratio would be closer to 100%. This is a matter of great concern to all of us in this Honorable House, and it shows the extent of the mismanagement by this government, and more particularly the weaknesses exposed by COVID-19 in this economic management of this country by this administration. And Mr. Speaker, I recall over the past 4 years, we on this side have been cautioning the Minister for Finance, indicating to him that the borrowing, like there's no tomorrow, would have placed us in difficulty when we were confronted with an emergency. A government has a choice of a number of policy responses it can implement in the face of a pandemic like COVID-19, which hasn't induced a contraction in the tourism sector and, of course, related industries. We know we are confronted with serious curtailment of public sector income, and therefore we had to preserve the fiscal space to respond to this emergency. Having borrowed for all useless projects and activities, we are confronted with a scenario now when we're supposed to be utilizing CDB, the IMF and World Bank, to assist us in responding to the pandemic. We have to utilize those resources to pay loans. And whilst the member for Vieux North was on his feet, asking about the various questions, the fishermen and other persons in the community, the government specifically asked for the fiscal space to respond to health-related expenditure. In other words, give us the loan to pay that obligation, leaving our hands free to respond to those situations in the country. But obviously, based on its maneuverings over the years, it has tied up itself and cannot respond effectively to the situations. Mr. Speaker, the fiscal policy choices, put simply, are whether a government should help support consumption by way of income support and cash transfers to those affected, or to increase investment to attempt to restart the economy. Or you can have a combination of the two policy approaches, Mr. Speaker. Namely, policies that both promote consumption to households and support business to ensure survival and capital projects, to aid in the recovery and stimulate growth. In other words, Mr. Speaker, in the immediate period of COVID-19, our fiscal response was supposed to assist those who have lost their jobs and others from falling into poverty, and for them to continue to survive so that there is consumption in the economy of the country. Mr. Speaker, the policy adopted by most countries, to substantiate my argument, includes support to households and businesses. So many businesses are closing down. So many businesses, Mr. Speaker, may disappear, where real St. Lucians are employed in. And those persons have made tremendous sacrifice to keep business flowing over the years. And during this COVID-19, the government was supposed to be in a position to provide a more conducive environment for them to survive. The government, for some unknown perverse reason, has adopted the approach of predominantly spending on investment for roads and other infrastructural projects, including construction of the airport. These projects are predominantly capital intensive and do not target the affected populations who have currently lost their jobs from the pandemic, Mr. Speaker. That's very simple to understand, and I think the member for Vieux-Fort North was talking about the opportunity cost of utilizing those monies to pay the loan. As a result, the level of poverty and pain inflicted on the population has increased substantially as the social protection mechanisms instituted by the government have been weak, slow, and ineffective, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the policy of using the NIC resources to provide for relief for the members has implications for the long-term sustainability of the NIC and is not a desirable policy approach to take in such a situation. The government has not responded in an expeditious manner to provide the urgent support that people need at this time, allowing people to endure further pain and suffering. Government's response to this pandemic should have been much quicker, utilizing, as I indicated a few moments ago, the IMF, World Bank, CDB, and other resources to help support households and businesses. Mr. Speaker, further, many small businesses are on the brink of closure, and some, like I indicated, have already closed down. The policy response by the government to small and medium enterprises has been weak and ineffective, offering a range of tax concessions to financial institutions who lend to them. What's the reality, Mr. Speaker? It is well known that bank lending to the private sector has contracted for 6 consecutive years, given that banks have adopted a risk-averse approach to lending to the private sector as a result of the high levels of non-performing loans from that sector and the increased risk of lending to that sector. Mr. Speaker, banks have in fact been investing much of the deposits in foreign assets. The policy of giving corporate tax credits to banks as a result of lending to small business will therefore not yield the desired effect, given that it does not alter the risk of lending to that sector. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, when the opposition speaks on this issue in this Honorable House, it is further indicating to the Minister for Finance and the government that this is not a joke. The full effect of COVID-19 is yet to be felt. But they come and sit business as usual and believe that we are playing politics. We came here to conduct serious business. If they come to play, they can go to SNS and buy their toys and play. But we on this side did not come here to play. People's lives are being affected. Children cannot go to school in September because there are no resources to support them going to school. And we see absolutely no framework to create that improvement in their lives to ensure that those families can survive. And when we come here, Mr. Speaker, we accentuate the business of the people. We shall always do so. But even in COVID-19, the business of horses are more important to them than the business of the people. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, I am asking the government to recalibrate, to change the focus to the people of this country. Help our people navigate the COVID-19 turbulent period so that together we can recover from this thing a better and, of course, stronger society. Mr. Speaker, I promise to be brief, and so I yield the floor.
Member for Barbados.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise to give support to this motion and to make my contribution as it pertains to the post-COVID plan. But Mr. Speaker, before I get into the matter being discussed right now, please allow me to respond to what the member from Chastanet is try to make us look like we are a vindictive government, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm surprised that the member for Chastanet East, who have been in this honorable house for over 25 years, does not have the skill to make a presentation and to discuss what he wants to discuss without you asking him to get back on track. That shows, Mr. Speaker, that the member has given up, because he said if he can continue speaking how he would like to speak, he will decide to discontinue his contribution. But, Mr. Speaker, now listen to the member for Chastanet East, and please allow me to respond, because you know, Mr. Speaker, that while I'm seeing letters going around, when I stand in this honorable house, I know how to make my contribution. Speak about victimization. I want to ask him also about the Balata field lights. What about the team on Cotton Hall during the time 2011 to 16? What about the Union Terrace Court in Barbono? What about the Garden Field in Barbono, Mr. Speaker? The 11th Spencer facility in Carcombe, Mr. Speaker. What about it? And Mr. Speaker, this same member, when I came in this honorable house and requesting support for my school children in Lage, because we had a program in Lage to build a new school in Lage, this same member said it was not necessary. Lage does not need a new school. What about? Because Lage is supporting the United Workers' Party? Talk about victimization, Mr. Speaker? But, Mr. Speaker, you all know that's a habit. No? That's a habit, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, please allow me to inform this honorable house, because I heard a lot has been asked as to what happened to agriculture. And I'm a bit surprised, Mr. Speaker, that those on the opposite side have not yet educated themselves to find out what's happening to agriculture post-COVID and the support that we are giving to agriculture, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in this year's estimate of revenue and expenditure 2020-2021, there's a line item 0333, Mr. Speaker, speaking to Agricultural Assistance Program COVID-19. And unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, during the policy debate, I was not able to articulate what is it that we were going to do because of time constraint. So, Mr. Speaker, please allow me the opportunity to at least to report to this honorable house, based on the fact that, Mr. Speaker, they are asking, what is it that we are doing for agriculture? I'll just be general, Mr. Speaker, I'm not going into details. Mr. Speaker, my Honorable Prime Minister and Cabinet and the Ministry of Finance has made an allocation in the estimates for agriculture. And the Speaker, there are many subsectors that will be benefiting from that allocation of $7,346,400, Mr. Speaker. Fisheries and aquaculture, the livestock subsector, Mr. Speaker, crop production, apiculture, banana production, land preparation and market access. All these areas, Mr. Speaker, will be benefiting from that allocation. On behalf of the farmers out there and the stakeholders, I want to express my appreciation and my ministry's appreciation, Mr. Speaker, to the Minister of Finance and, of course, to the Cabinet for agreeing to give support to the stakeholders in this sector. Mr. Speaker, as it pertains to fisheries and aquaculture, we have registered 270 boat owners. And we have agreed, Mr. Speaker, as a government and as a ministry, to give a fuel subsidy to each of these boat owners in the tune of $900. So, Mr. Speaker, nous avons ces pêcheurs qui étaient registrés en 2019. These are the people you are dealing with, the boat owners who are registered boat owners in 2019, Mr. Speaker. And nous avons chaque fuel pour ça aller dehors, pour ça joindre masse sous ces poissons. Gas or fuel? Okay, Mr. Speaker. In addition to that, Mr. Speaker, we are giving them VHF radios. There's about 70 of these persons who are registered, 70 of them who do not have VHF radios, Mr. Speaker, and the government is donating to these 70 individual radios. And in addition to, Mr. Speaker, we are going to pay the license for these fishermen who have those radios. So there are 200 who have already, and we are giving an additional 70, and we go pay all the license for all these individuals. So when you talk about what support we are giving, that is what we are giving, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, our aquaculture farmers, the farmers like that, poisson mass, you go give them seed, and you go buy roti poisson, et petit shrimps, baby shrimps. So you have to be a production, Mr. Speaker. And of course, Mr. Speaker, these farmers will be benefiting from this through the Department of Fisheries. Our CMOS farmers, Mr. Speaker, also, our CMOS farmers will be getting support because, Mr. Speaker, we, from the ministry, went down to Poale and to Savonsville, and we interacted with the CMOS farmers, and we see there's a need to give them support. So based on the post-COVID-19 program, Mr. Speaker, we are giving our CMOS farmers support also. Now, more time, Mr. Speaker, member for the Fort North D about Iwe Pêche Cavern Poisson. Mr. Speaker, not everybody that go around selling fish are fishermen. You have what you call the middlemen, and that's a form of employment for them, Mr. Speaker. So when you come in this honorable house and you say oh, fishermen can sell their fish, the fisheries complex, Mr. Speaker, they're purchasing. And if you look at the records, they almost purchased the same amount of fish in the first half of this year compared to before we closed, Mr. Speaker. So they are purchasing, Mr. Speaker. So I don't understand why they would come in this honorable house and make those pronouncements, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the other area we're looking at quickly, the livestock subsector. Mr. Speaker, nous allons buy support pour farmers qui ont nourri cochon. Nous allons buy support pour farmers qui ont nourri poule. Nous allons buy support pour farmers qui ont nourri cabrit et puis mouton. And of course, the farmers qui ont fait siomel. So our swine farmers, our poultry farmers, Mr. Speaker, our small ruminant farmers, and our apiculture farmers all are going to get support under the post-COVID-19 program, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, moving on quickly, the crop production farmers, because those we say Minister Fig, but we are giving support to everybody, Mr. Speaker. This government gives support to every farmer in the sector. Mr. Speaker, for our crop production farmers, we have about 2,500 crop farmers. They'll be getting fertilizer support, they'll be getting seedling support, Mr. Speaker, and also they'll be getting land preparation support. In addition to that, Mr. Speaker, they'll be getting input. So, say farmers in the regime now, especially the farmers that in the 7-crop program now, you can buy your fertilizer, you can buy your cell for apply, you can buy your, Mr. Speaker, seedlings, you can buy your plant, you can buy your chemic, and you can also buy your support for your prepare tell you, Mr. Speaker, free of charge. So, Mr. Speaker, moving on quickly. I spoke about land preparation already, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, our banana farmers. Mr. Speaker, I'm sure members of this honorable house are aware of the support we have given to our banana farmers because of the challenges that Windfresh are facing right now. We have advance payment of $2.4 million to our banana farmers. And now, Mr. Speaker, as a shareholder, speaking with the other shareholders, that's St. Vincent and Dominica, unfortunately Grenada did not participate in the discussion, we have decided that it's necessary to send Windfresh UK into administration. Mr. Speaker, I have met with the NFTO, informing them of that decision, and of course, for us to discuss the way forward. Mr. Speaker, what did we do as a government? As a government, to secure the interests of our banana farmers, and of course the interests of the respective shareholders, the government saw it necessary, Mr. Speaker, to pay off the UK loan. To pay off Barclays UK, the loan that Windfresh UK was owing Barclays UK. So right now, Mr. Speaker, we are the ones calling the shot. Nobody did that gouvernement certainly pay off Barclays on behalf of Windfresh. Et puis actuellement, nous avons mis un administrateur en place. Et puis l'administrateur ça a fait tout ça qui est nécessaire, Mr. Speaker, to revive, if possible, and I say if possible, to revive Windfresh UK. Also, Mr. Speaker, in addition to this, I just want to express on behalf of the ministry our appreciation to the team at Ministry of Finance, who, within short notice, Mr. Speaker, was able to get the resources for us to be in that position that we're in right now. And I want to express our appreciation to the team under the direction of the Director of Finance, Ms. Rigobert. Mr. Speaker, but moving forward, we are also going to give our banana farmers fertilizer, and we are also going to give them spray oil so at least they can control black sickle fever. So, Mr. Speaker, as a government, I'm confident that we're doing all we can to give support to our farmers. I know, Mr. Speaker, that the farmers have the fullest confidence in this government under the leadership of this Prime Minister, and I'm sure that based on the programs we have put in place, because of course, when I'm hearing that we have to go into agriculture, yes, we have to go into agriculture, and going to agriculture outside of tourism, we cannot, Mr. Speaker. The tourism industry is important. It's important for us. It's how we position ourselves in agriculture, Mr. Speaker, to benefit from the tourism industry. That's what's important. And that is what we do as a government. As a government, we have sat down. We have said that the development of tourism, the expansion of tourism, is an opportunity for agriculture. We're not fighting tourism. Tourism is an opportunity for us. Look at all that's close, Mr. Speaker. What's happening? What's happening? The production we have in St. Lucia, we need that market. So what we have done? We have put the food basket together under the advice of the Honorable Prime Minister. It's working well. You know, the marketing board that we restructured where we got endless criticism is working well. So, Mr. Speaker, when I'm hearing that President Yeltsin's opposite is criticizing the policies that we are putting in place, right? We here, Mr. Speaker, we are not afraid to take the tough decisions. And I'm happy to be with a leader who is not afraid to take a tough decision, and a cabinet who will give support in taking a tough decision. So, Mr. Speaker, I want to say that we are going to continue going along the lines we are doing because we are seeing the benefits. We are seeing the benefits, Mr. Speaker. Not like those on the opposite, all they can do, we will. We will if you give us a chance. They were there. They were there, Mr. Speaker. And they never did. We said, give us a chance and we're going to do it, and we are doing it. That is the difference. We are doing it, Mr. Speaker. We are delivering. And like I told my constituents, Mr. Speaker, I know election mood, you know. I'm still in a working mood. I don't know why people seem to be in election mood. We are still in a working mood. We still have a lot of work to do, Mr. Speaker. And we're going to continue to work. And of course, the support of the Minister of Finance, we are going to work. So, Mr. Speaker, I just want to give some general overview as to where we are as it pertains to agriculture. And I'm very optimistic. With that support, we can see the continuation of the development of the agricultural sector. So thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Castries Southeast.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to give my support to this motion by the Honorable Minister of Finance for that loan from CDB. Mr. Speaker, you would think that given the COVID situation and the challenges faced by St. Lucia, which the opposition members have highlighted on several occasions, that they understand the time and the crisis that St. Lucia is in, that a bill a motion as simple as that, a motion that basically gets us to a point where our creditors, in this case, the Caribbean Development Bank, based on the laws governing CDB, cannot give us a moratorium on payments as we have asked the local banks to do in St. Lucia. Mr. Speaker, you would think that honorable men who have been in this house and boast about the time that they have been here would understand the basics of what the government is doing. I mean, if the government came to do some, there are other motions that they can speak to, that they can find things to criticize. But Mr. Speaker, you would think that something as simple as that the members would come to understand that we have debt obligations. So let us put that in context, Mr. Speaker. If there's a default on payment, then you have to go into a structural adjustment program. If you find yourself in a situation where you cannot meet your obligations, and Mr. Speaker, it gives me time to go back and look at some of the things that we've had to do since this COVID situation. And so when I listen to the member for Castries East and leader of the opposition, it's very discouraging, Mr. Speaker, very discouraging that this is the leader of the opposition in St. Lucia, that you would expect something of substance, something of value, something that you can really sit and think back and say, hey, that is something that is worth considering. But more and more, Mr. Speaker, the member just sat down just because you asked him to go back on course. I mean, he could have asked the member for library. When you've gone off the navigation compass, how to get back. But Mr. Speaker, let's go to the real issue. And he said it, debt to pay debt. Is that something new in St. Lucia? So Mr. Speaker, every time we came and roll over a bond, it's debt to pay debt. How many times have both governments done that in the House? Why would the member for Castries, and for that matter, Treasury bills, Mr. Speaker, Treasury bills, short-term instruments, which is what was used by the previous government when they could not raise the requisite financing from the same financial institutions. And you've seen the clipping with the former Prime Minister and member for Beaufort South, saying that something had happened in St. Lucia that had never happened before. That we had gone to the bond market and could not raise the requisite financing that the country needed. Mr. Speaker, that didn't start with this government. So let's give a fair assessment of where the economy of this country is. So CDB's rules does not allow them to give you the waiver that we are looking for. So what they did, understanding the gravity of the COVID situation, made the same arrangement available for the borrowing members of CARICOM. That is not just for St. Lucia. That is for the CARICOM members who are faced with a difficult situation. And what I was trying to get the member for Viewport North, people like to tell you what their profession is. Well, they call me the bus driver. So they figure out I have no sense. So he said he's a teacher and he can read. Well, to read is one thing. To comprehend what you read is something completely different from being able to look at words and pronounce them. So, Mr. Speaker, the context of the motion presented is that we are not getting the financing, but it is creating fiscal space for the government. In other words, if we did not get this loan, what would have happened? You now have to take this 10 million US dollars, or roughly 10.7, which is about 29 million. You would have had to take $29 million that you don't have presently from the economy to be able to meet your debt obligations during that time. But this is not money that we are going to draw down on. Is that so difficult to comprehend? And the member for Castries is, at least he got that one right. He said it's like using one credit card to pay another credit card. Mr. Speaker, this government is a transparent, it's very transparent and honest government. In that whatever we are doing, there's no hidden agenda. We come to the House and we give the explanations and the information. Unlike previous governments, who when they wanted to borrow $41 million and to hide the payments of obligations to Rochamel, hid it in the figure and nobody knew what they were approving the $41 million for. We don't operate like that, Mr. Speaker. We've been upfront. The borrowing is to pay the debts to CDB. You see, Mr. Speaker, so when the member for Castries East and the member for Viewport North, Mr. Speaker, the member kept on saying, well, he hopes that this $29 million is used to do this and do that. Look, the member for Babono, he has already highlighted what the government is doing in agriculture. The member for ancillary countries has highlighted what is happening in the tourism sector. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister and his team did an excellent job in presenting the economic recovery plan and social stabilization plan that this government has in mind. And some of it, Mr. Speaker, already rolling out. Mr. Speaker, these are difficult times. COVID has not made it easy for anybody, but this government don't come and cry and complain about things. We know it's a difficult time, but that is where you get the true test of what real leadership is, Mr. Speaker. And that is what we have on this side in the leader and Prime Minister member for Mikud South. So, Mr. Speaker, let me address some of the concerns. The economy under COVID, in the COVID crisis, is performing as good as the Labour Party performed in the best years in government. And you can go and check the records, Mr. Speaker. With no COVID, St. Lucia was in a worse situation under the management of the Labour Party than it is today with the COVID situation. And here's what they say. Can you believe that the members say that the works being done, the capital projects being implemented has no impact on the people? I challenge the members, 3 of them from the South. I challenge them to say that Viewfort has not had more economic activity in the COVID crisis than the best year of the Labour Party in office. Mr. Speaker, St. Jude project, hundreds of workers. Presently, with the work that is commencing at the airport, with the road construction and all of the activities. Mr. Speaker, the Wasco building, all of the works that are ongoing in the Viewfort area, the Ojo Labs, Mr. Speaker, I tell BPO that just opened its doors in the COVID situation. The water projects, Mr. Speaker, I mean, are the members opposite for real? Mr. Speaker, you are telling me that with the 300 plus workers at the St. Jude construction site, who every fortnight could go to the bank and cash their check and take home some money to take care of their family, you telling me that the expenditure has no impact? Now, Mr. Speaker, I understand what they are saying, you know. Because when they handle projects, whether it be national or international, it has zero impact on the local economy. You know why, Mr. Speaker? Find out who gets the projects and find out the terms under which they get the projects. But you see, with this government, there's a spread of the work. And I challenge them to look at all of the contracts that have been issued under this government and see how many local contractors have been awarded contracts. Mr. Speaker, in the Mikud constituencies, we have the Mikud Wellness Center, we have the daycare center, we have the extension block on the school, we have the center down in Angers. I mean, the playing field in Mikud, the roadworks. Mr. Speaker, all of this is to help to create a positive impact because the mainstay of the economy has been impacted. What is so difficult for members opposite to understand? Then they go on, Mr. Speaker. They talk about the Carrie-Chris report and the downgrading. I know that COVID has impacted this government. I want to ask them, when we were downgraded from a BBB+, what was the crisis? Other than the management of the St. Lucia Labour Party, which had 3 years of negative growth, if there's anything as growing in the opposite. I never understand that English term of negative growth. For me, it's either you growing or you're not growing. But the English language calls it negative growth. 3 years of a government. The economy going in reverse. Remember I told Mr. Speaker, I've used that phrase before in the House. It's one thing that goes the same speed forward and backward. Is a Ferguson. That thing they use to plow the land. You know this thing that the front wheels have nothing engaged in it. It has 4 gears in forward and 4 gears in reverse. Well, when the Labour Party presided over the economy, they were like a Ferguson. But they only used the 4 gears in reverse. They did not know the 4 gears that goes forward, Mr. Speaker, because the economy was in reverse. So, Mr. Speaker, given where we are, and what we want to do to stabilize the economy. If we had the money, Mr. Speaker, we would have said to CDB, that's okay. We will continue to meet our debt obligations. But given the uncertainty of COVID and the prolonged period that we expect the impact to be felt, and further, Mr. Speaker, to create the fiscal space for the government to meet other obligations where we are not going to get these kinds of breaks, the government decided that it's a good opportunity to capitalize on. Mr. Speaker, so as I said, under the previous government, 3 years of negative growth, 1 year of no growth. Mr. Speaker, the member for Castries East again seeks to highlight victimization and saying about his toilet facilities. Every time is a toilet talk, Mr. Speaker. You know, every time is a toilet talk. Mr. Speaker, all of us on this side of the House who are in Parliament have faced the wrath of victimization. And I want to remind the member for Castries East that when he speaks about victimization, he needs to remember 1997, when the decision for affirmative action was taken by the St. Lucia Labour Party, of which he was a part of.
Mr. Speaker, on the point of order.
On the point of member.
Yeah, Mr. Speaker, it is easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than for the member for Castries Southeast to prove what he's saying is correct. I was at that convention, Mr. Speaker.
So was I.
At no time did the leadership of the St. Lucia Labour Party entertain affirmative action. At no time. And I wish to state categorically, without any fear of contradiction, the Labour Party never at its conference passed any affirmative action, nor entertain it. So I would like the member for Castries Southeast to withdraw the statement, Mr. Speaker, and to refrain from making that statement in this House again.
When the parties, listen to my words, when the party speaks of action by other parties, I don't think it's parliamentary business. No, that is what I'm trying to say. I do not want to comment. I do not want to comment on when. Honorable member, you were you were at the convention, you said?
I was at the convention.
Proceed, sir.
And I was a delegate at the convention, Mr. Speaker. When it's convenient, you all tell me as a member of the Labour Party. But when I say what happened, you all tell me no, that. Mr. Speaker, the member has his point of view. Mr. Speaker, I can Mr. Speaker, the record will show how the vote the record will show how the vote was passed, honorable member. And Mr. Speaker, if you go back to the records, you will see in this House I have said that the then leader of the party, Dr. Anthony, spoke against it, but it was passed by the majority in that. And I'm in Hansard as saying that, Mr. Speaker. And so, Mr. Speaker, when members want to talk about victimization, I tell the member for Labrie, Bexor is the route that he used for 5 years when he was in government, commuting between Castries and Labrie. I think on very few occasions would he have gone through Soufrière. Mr. Speaker, the Sun Valley Pact at the Bexham Mac Junction sat there for 5 years, Mr. Speaker. After $5 million from the Taiwanese Constituency Development Project had been assigned to Castries Southeast over the 5-year period, I begged, I wrote, I pleaded. They left me and the late Asen James, former member for Mikud South. They left us standing in the corridor of the Capac building for half an hour as MPs waiting to see the coordinator of the CDP program. And when we were tired of waiting, we would leave and we would go and we would come back until the former member for Mikud South said to me, I'm too old for this. I've given up. And none of us got any, not the pack, that all the pack needed. They like toilet talk. I can tell them. All the toilets were purchased already. All we needed was the plumbing. $45,000 is what it would take to finish the pack. And out of $5 million allocated for CDP for 5 years, we did not get not 1,000 to finish the pack. We didn't ask them for the money. We said, send a contractor and finish the work. Not even that, Mr. Speaker. The court that was started at Sarot, the people cut the steel and left with it because just the foundation had been done. Not one day. Mr. Speaker, I have told the members opposite, we are going to break even at the end of this term. Mr. Speaker, every time I come to this house, and I know I get into problems sometimes, Mr. Speaker, I'd rather be honest and upfront with everybody. Mr. Speaker, we move on. We move on. If you look at the matters being raised, payment of the loan, Mr. Speaker, to create fiscal space. And I wonder, I wish the member for, I know he must be downstairs listening. The member for Viewfort North, who said that he was a teacher, and if I think he cannot read, I know he can read. So, Mr. Speaker, if he can read, he didn't go through the budget and see all of the provisions. The last set of borrowings that was done of the $70 million, he didn't see everything that was highlighted to help the fishermen, the farmers, those who are not paying NIC, those who are paying NIC. And when they talk, when the member for Labrie, my friend, the member for Labrie, my friend, Mr. Speaker, when I sat on this side where they are there, they talk about how the small businesses and the medium-sized businesses have been impacted. Mr. Speaker, when the government they were part of came to this house in 2012 to implement VAT at 15%, I said to the members, I said, members, you all are going to kill all the small businesses and medium-sized businesses in St. Lucia. And when the member for Viewfort South stood up to defend, I tell him the same thing you call an oppressive tax. Today you are putting it. I want you to take responsibility for all of the small businesses that will close and the medium-sized businesses that will not be able to survive the ravages of what VAT. VAT did more to destroy business in St. Lucia than COVID has done, Mr. Speaker. These businesses, some of them went under, some of them never survive. Up to a day like today. And when this government came in, Mr. Speaker, what did we do? As soon as we came in, we reduced the VAT by 2.5%. And as soon as we did that, you saw the corresponding response by the economy, by better investments from small businesses and from medium-sized businesses, which helped, Mr. Speaker, to mitigate against the high unemployment rate that we inherited from the previous government. And Mr. Speaker, we've made the promises, and we will get there. We will get there, where VAT will be further reduced. Mr. Speaker, I am on the record as saying that my preference is for a sales tax. And I am on the record when I was in opposition. We will get there when we've managed the crisis that we inherited. You know, Mr. Speaker, it is easy to say that small businesses will close. This will happen, that will happen. They can say that, Mr. Speaker. But when they were in government, they did nothing for the survival of businesses that was closing as a result of the high rate at which VAT was implemented. So here's what has happened, Mr. Speaker. They're asking us to resuscitate some of the things. And rightly so, because they know the right government. They know the I-do government is in office. So what they could not fix, they have asked us to fix it. And that is what we are on course to do, Mr. Speaker. Because when you look at, can you imagine, Mr. Speaker, for a moment, what would have happened to this country if the Labour Party was in office managing COVID? Mr. Speaker, I mean, there was no crisis when they handled the economy. Unemployment went to 24.8 or 9%. Youth unemployment went to 44%. Under this government, in 4 years, we had brought down overall unemployment to 16.8, and youth unemployment down from 44 to 34%. Mr. Speaker, we want cost and we want target, and that is why the economy is still breathing. The economy is still breathing today because we had established a solid foundation of 4 years of consecutive growth. Mr. Speaker, I mean, what is so difficult for members? I mean, I know they're in opposition. But silently, Mr. Speaker, in their quiet moments, they know the best government for this country is on this side of the house today. Even though they may not openly admit it, Mr. Speaker. But the evidence is there. The evidence is there. So, Mr. Speaker, when the Prime Minister comes and he presents a motion as simple as that, to say, look here, CDB cannot give us the breathing space that we require, but they have given us a very concessional loan. The money is not coming to us, Mr. Speaker. The money is being used to pay the debts that we were obligated to pay to CDB. So that creates some fiscal space. But it is that fiscal space that is being used to help pay the public servant salaries from month to month. It is this fiscal space that is helping us to give the banana industry a chance to survive. Mr. Speaker, how many years? How long? We're not the ones who bought the bananas. Windfresh sold bananas. The money should have been used to pay the farmers. The money was used to pay some of the debt of Windfresh. What did this government do? As a caring, sympathetic government, We came to the rescue of the farmers, and we saw to it that the money went directly to pay the farmers. I challenged the members on the other side. And member for Labrie, I was a banana farmer, so I knew exactly what happened. As I was at the conference, and I knew what happened. Mr. Speaker, when the previous government was there, when they did away with SLBGA and they established SLBC, they took $45 million to pay the debt of the farmers. They paid the debt of SLBGA, they said, for the farmers. But if you ask every farmer who's still alive today, of which I was one, Mr. Speaker, every month when you sold your bananas, they still deducted for the debt that was paid for by the taxpayers of this country. And I challenge the members opposite to tell me that is not true. But today they want to come and present themselves as persons for farmers. Ask them for who they paid the $45 million. Because if you paid it for the farmers, why was the deduction still being made from the farmers? Who was getting the money? I want the members opposite and the member for Castries, who was always a deputy, to tell us what happened there. Tell us what happened. You see, Mr. Speaker, history and records are there to remind us of what we have done and how we have done it. So, Mr. Speaker, I want to assure you that the management of this economy is in good hands. I want to assure the people of St. Lucia, we're not saying we're paying the debt for the farmers and somebody else getting the money on our side. You see, under this Minister of Agriculture, when we pay the debt for the farmers are the ones who benefit from it. And I challenge them. And Mr. Speaker, this $45 million that they paid for is still unaccounted for. All of it is not accounted for. Because I can tell you, if I had my banana slips today, when you went to the weighbridge and when they made your payments, you would see all the deductions that was made. So, Mr. Speaker, this government does not operate like that. We paid the debt for the farmers. So what they are asking for, we have a school program coming on to assist parents with meeting some of their commitments for school. They ask, what are we doing on the social side? We are beefing up what we are doing at SSDF, and I heard them criticizing that. Can you believe that, Mr. Speaker? If the politicians do it, they have a problem. The schools themselves with SSDF have made the arrangement so that the parents can come to the schools and get the forms filled out, so they don't have to go to a politician where they can say, I was victimized by that politician. The members opposite still complain. So what can we do that will please them, Mr. Speaker? Nothing. But I am convinced that the people of St. Lucia will see through what is being presented. They said they have social recovery plan. Their recovery plan might take 10 years. You remember they said they were putting $100 million in the economy immediately? And after 5 years, they said they immediately was 5 years. So I don't want to know when it's not immediately what will happen. But Mr. Speaker, I am confident that the management of this economy, with the competent team we have at the Ministry of Finance, under the leadership of the Minister of Finance, will ride out this storm of COVID, and St. Lucia will come out on the other side much better than we inherited it. I thank you, Mr.
Honorable Prime Minister.
Speaker, I beg that we suspend the House for lunch for 1 hour.
Honorable members, the question is that the House do stand suspended for the next hour. I now put the question. As many as are of that opinion say aye. As many as of a contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. House is suspended for next hour.
So the Honorable House of Assembly has been suspended for 1 hour's lunch. The debates on the motions that have been forwarded in the Honorable House today, as well as the bills down for consideration, will continue after the lunch break. Do stay tuned to NTN, channel 122, and our YouTube and Facebook pages and channel for the continuation of the House of Assembly sitting later on today, scheduled to recommence at 3 p.m. Stay tuned.